Are you a fan of the Iron Sysadmin podcast? If you are, don't forget you can support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/IronSysadmin. Or you can buy merchandise at teespring.com/stores/IronSysadmin. And thank you. News, ops, and a little bit of paranoia. Welcome to the Iron Sysadmin Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to tonight's episode of the Iron Sysadmin Podcast. I'm your host, Nate, and I'm joined by lots of folks tonight. We'll just list them off, and you guys can all fight over who gets to introduce yourselves first. But we're going to start with our guest for tonight, Mr. Paul Asadoorian. Hi!
Hey, how's it going, Nate? It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here. And, of course, I'm joined by two of our usual co-hosts, Mark and Jason. Say hi. Fight. Go on.
Hi.
Strike the earth!
Strike the earth.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're good.
Hey,
from
Mark.
Is that from your dwarf game?
Hey, Paul. That strike the earth is the motto for Dwarf Fortress, but
Yep.
more about that later.
So if Paul starts to sing Disney tunes, I'll be kind of surprised. Right?
Your
He's already got the
listeners may
hey
run.
thing going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't sing much. We can talk about that later.
I love you, Stu and Hay.
All right, folks. So if you guys don't know who Paul is, I guess we'll start there, right? Who is Paul and why is he on our show? So if you guys have been around podcasting in the IT world, specifically InfoSec, for what has it been, like 20 years, Paul? How long has your show been going?
We started in October of 2005.
So almost 20 years. My God.
Yeah.
And I may get some of this history wrong because I wasn't a listener at the beginning. I picked you up probably a decade in, to be honest. But you started out as just Security Weekly, right? Or was it Paul? It was Security Weekly. Then you switched the name up. And you started like a whole freaking
that's
network.
Well, it's a funny story. So we started my nickname, because I was such a nerd, even amongst my nerd friends, my nickname was Paul.com. And so that's what I called the show early on.
Okay.
Later on, we had to change the name due to a trademark dispute. So like I had my website was called paul.com.com, like PAULDOTCOM.com. And so the person who owned Paul.com, like it's even difficult to communicate this to lawyers and such. My lawyer and I actually gave a joint presentation at Source Boston conference on this whole thing called Hacking the Trademark. So we ultimately had to change the name to Security Weekly. So we called it Paul's Security Weekly instead of Paul.com Security Weekly. So we maintained Security Weekly. And then once I had left one of my day jobs, which we can get into, but and I did Security Weekly full time, it became the Security Weekly Network around 2015 timeframe.
Okay. Right. So that's I was listening at the time when like you started to branch out into more shows and things like that. To be honest, it was hard to keep up. Right? You were producing so much content.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the shows we launched were successful. Some were not. I still push to bring some of those shows back. But most of the shows we created were successful. So, that's kind of how we rolled, and we created new shows, and if it stuck, we kept going with it. And the way the rotation kind of worked was usually myself, sometimes Matt or another host would start the show. Like usually it was me in the beginning. So like Application Security Weekly, I was a host on the show. And then over time, like I basically passed the torch, and I'm like, you are now the primary host and I am not. So you carry on with the show. So like Adrian hosts Enterprise Security Weekly. I'm like, dude, you got this. It's all you. So most of the shows I kind of nurtured from the beginning, and then passed the torch off to basically, I mean, they're essentially a bunch of my friends. that I brought on to like run all of the shows. And I have weekly calls with all of the hosts, one weekly call with all the hosts, and it's like one of the highlights of my week every single week.
Well, that's great. So if I ever want a week off, I'm just going to have Jason run the show. What do you think, Jason?
There you go.
Well, I'm so reliable, so
You've been
I'll
reliable
totally
lately. Just usually a little late. That's all.
Wait, so if I'm all right, hang on. So I can't be at the next one. Wait, I gotta leave right now. Sorry. I don't want to get roped into having to run this.
You picked the wrong browser again, didn't you?
Scheduling hosts is still a challenge.
Yeah.
Scheduling in general, hosting guests is a very, as you guys know, a very challenging thing when it comes to running a podcast.
Yeah. Now you've actually got a studio though, don't you? That you guys get together to record in, or do you do things remotely like we're doing tonight?
I do. Yeah. So at some point, basically, my wife was really upset with me. I mean, more than like the normal level of upset with me.
Oh boy.
Don't get me wrong. My wife is wonderful. We just went to see Kevin Hart and had a great time, and we have 3 kids. But as most married couples, you kind of get under each other's skin. And when every
Kevin
week,
Hart have 3 kids?
No, we don't. My wife and I have 3 kids, and we went to see Kevin Hart. Sorry.
Okay. How many kids do you have with Kevin Hart?
Just 2 with Kevin.
Okay.
Yeah. But so, my wife had an extra reason to be upset with me, which is not what you want to do in marriage advice. You don't want to do that. And one of the reasons that that she had was every week, and back then it was on Thursdays, all my friends would come over to do not 1 but 2 podcasts. So we'd do Paul's Security Weekly, and then we'd do Stogie Geeks here in the studio that I'm sitting in my home. And we'd stay up, we'd drink and be loud and stay up really late and smoke cigars even after the show. And my friends lived like pretty much walking distance from where I am, so they would kind of stumble home and fall and be loud outside. And it was like at some point she was like, "You gotta get that crap out of the house." She's like, "I'm totally done."
Let me ask a clarifying question. How old were the kids at this time?
Oh, they were still like being born. Like,
oh God.
Yeah, 20, 30. Like she was pregnant for some of the, like she'd be asleep because she was pregnant with like our middle son, and we'd be having a good time, or they'd be really little, and my friend stumbled and fell on a rock outside. Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah, that had to change.
Yeah, so so we looked into getting like a different house actually, which is like how much podcasting in my life, like actual life, intertwine. Like, well, what if we just buy a bigger house? Maybe it has a separate structure, and I can have the office there. That actually fell through. I actually put an offer on a house that had an in-law that we were going to run the business out of, which not too many people actually even know about, quite frankly. And that fell through. They rejected our offer. And I happened to be, this will really floor you, at a cigar lounge. Like 12 minutes from my house, a new cigar lounge opened. And I had a cigar podcast at that time. And I started talking to the manager. And I was like, this is really cool. I'm like, I'm going to come here and work. So I started doing more work from the cigar lounge. And I was walking out of the cigar lounge one day, and I'm like, you guys have it was it's like a strip mall kind of thing. So there's like 5 units on top, 5 units on the bottom. Cigar lounge was up the top. And one of the units next to it was essentially empty. I'm like, what are you guys doing with that? I'm like, you're going to rent that? And I'm like, if so, I have 2 questions. I said, how much? And can we smoke in it? And I'm like, if the price is reasonable and the answer is yes to question 2, you got yourself like a really reliable tenant. Because if I'm renting a place that I can smoke in, I'm staying there for a really long time. And my friend, now friend Todd, looked at me and he's like, let me check on that. And he came back almost immediately. He was like, yeah, dude. He's like, I can totally rent that. You can totally smoke. And I'm like, sold. And proceeded to start moving all my crap into this 1,000 square foot unit that has since expanded. So we have 3 units now. So we have 1,000 square feet dedicated to just the studio, and like 1,000 square feet for office space, and 1,000 square feet for basically storage and stuff. So yeah, that's the story of how we got a studio, which really super like helps out when you're doing a podcast, having a studio. separate from your house, and it's only 12 minutes down the street from my actual house. So
yeah, that's kind of the point that I was leading into, right?
Yeah.
It'd be hard for me to hand off the reins of the show, even just for a night, to Mark or Jason, just because all the production gear is here, right?
Right.
So
and we have producers too. We had producers pretty early on in our history, because it got to the point where, now keep in mind, we're talking like 2010-ish technology. Running a podcast by yourself was not as, I wouldn't say it's easy today, but it's a lot harder back then to run it by yourself. So we started adding producers. So we'd find basically interns in computer security that wanted to help out with our podcast. And I'm like, I just need you to run the live stream, right? Stuff similar to Riverside and what have you. And then, as we grew, we added full-time producers, and we have full-time producers today. And so I should say there's two different types of producers. If you want to get a little nerdy on like podcast operations for a moment, there's what I call production engineers, and those are the people that run the live streams, the mixers, the cameras, the lights, all of that stuff. And we can talk about some of the tech that I built in that arena to help grow my business, because I think it's interesting, and some of it's actually open sourced. Then there's what I call like production operations, which are the folks that make sure we have all the hosts on the show, the guests on the show, that the social media promotions go out, that the podcast is getting published, like the operations of a podcast separate from the engineering side. So we grew to a point where we had those roles.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. Currently, all of the production is on my shoulders, right? Like I do the editing, I do the recording, I do the live stream, which is why we get together half an hour before the show, and basically I'm running around like a chick with my head cut off trying to get everything ready to go. And then Paul tells me our website's down tonight, so.
I did. What was weird about that, Nate, is I saw that your website was down, and I was like, that kind of looks like a WordPress error.
They're sort of identifiable.
And I'm like, second, I'm kind of jealous. Like, I'm such a nerd that if I don't have some kind of super hard problem that I have to solve because something's down or some problem needs to be solved, and it's not just academic, like it's a real world problem.
Right.
Like if I don't, it's like a drug. If I don't have that, like I crave that. And so like when you were troubleshooting your website, I was super jealous. I was like, man, I wish one of my websites was down and I had to stay up and fix it.
Arranged, Mr.
There is a certain amount of like I don't know, is it like adrenaline to it when you're trying to repair a thing? And folks who listen to this show, right? This show is basically geared toward operations folks. I'm sure you guys understand. Sometimes it's like you're not looking for outages, but it is kind of exhilarating, right?
Yes.
When you crack a tough problem, it's one of the best feelings in the world.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
It's like, yes.
Yeah. So, a couple days ago, I was tinkering around. In fact, it was just last night. I was tinkering around with Owncast, which is, we've talked a bit about Mastodon. Owncast is a free, open source, self-hosted live streaming suite. Which is also federated with the Fediverse, right? And that's running on the same machine that runs IronSysAdmin.com and a couple of my other web things. So my first thought was, did I break it by standing up Owncast somehow? So turned out that that's not it. There's actually some sort of a database corruption error, which I'm going to have to look into after the show.
Yeah, and I think it's nice to have the SaaS providers make these streams available and just make it super easy and just outsource that stuff. However, I really like the podcast. I listen to a Linux podcast, Linux Unplugged. I think it's Linux Unplugged, Jupiter Broadcasting. And they have their own streaming server, and you have to be a member to watch their stream. And that gives you access to their, what do they use? A Matrix chat?
Okay.
I'm not sure if they're using Owncast or what they're using for their stream, but the stream is only for subscribers. And I'm like, I kind of like that. I think there was a time when you'd have a podcast and you just want to get it out in every avenue that you can. And that's some of my advice for creating a successful podcast. But I think you reach a point where you want to nurture your fan base, like the people who are regular subscribers, and give them something special.
Yeah.
And also economic times, recession, sponsors are one of the other super hard things with podcasting. It's nice to have they have a paid subscription for their podcast, and a lot of people do this model, and part of that subscription is you get the access to the live stream. So I think that's super cool. I mean, I'd totally be down.
Yeah, it's weird. It's hard, right? Because obviously Mark, Jason, and I put time and effort into making Iron Sysadmin. But from day one, I've always wanted to keep it as open and freely available as possible, right? But that's sort of at odds with paying for a podcast, right? Or even paying hosts, right? So we've done it for free. We have Patreon so that folks can give us money if they choose to, and we make just enough on Patreon to basically cover the hosting costs and whatnot. Which to me is a win, right? That's enough. That's enough. Although
we do better than that.
Yeah,
We've
right.
been able to buy equipment.
Yes.
Like the mic I'm using was
Yep.
thanks to our generous patrons.
Yep.
But yeah, to your point, the three of us all have, real grown-up jobs. So it would be one thing if we were trying to make a living with the podcasting. So Paul, is the podcasting effectively a career for you? Or is it like your side job, side business, and you have a real company, air quote, that you work for?
Over time, yes, both. So for a long time, right up until about 2015, it was a side hustle for me. In 2015, I was working for what was then called Tenable Network Security. Now they're Tenable. I left Tenable. That was super hard
because it became untenable.
Yeah, no, it didn't. That was actually. I'm glad you said that, Mark, because it was just the opposite. It was. I didn't want to leave because I loved the company, the people. Ron Gula's an amazing person. Renault. I mean, just all the people I worked with were amazing, and I'm like, guys, like it's reached the point where I got to make a decision. Like I can go grow this thing, or I can still try and do both. And I'm just doing both a disservice. So I've made the decision to go do the pod. And they were super supportive. They're like, we totally get it. Like, go do your thing. So I left, resigned from Tenable, did the podcast full time. In the meantime, it's interesting. Matt Alderman was my manager at Tenable. And after I left, he left, went to a startup, got that startup acquired, and then was looking for a job. And I contacted Matt, and I was like, dude, you need to come work for Security Weekly. And I'm like, I want you to be CEO. Because I'm more of a tech person and an idea person. I'm not a business execution expert. Like I can fake it until we maybe make it. I'm like, but you're the CEO. I'm the CTO. That could work really well. And amazingly, he said yes. He was like, let's go do this. And a little over a year later, we were acquired by the Cyber Risk Alliance. And so I worked for Cyber Risk Alliance for over a year or so. And then went back to working a full-time gig. So today I'm the principal security evangelist for a company called Eclipsium that does firmware security. The driving force behind that was really, I like to solve hard problems, and I think firmware is a really hard problem.
It's so firm, right?
It's firm. It is. It's firm. Yes. Well, I mean, firmware is.
Oh, is this one of these podcasts? That type of podcast?
Yeah, no.
No.
One of my favorite sayings is that it is not my saying. I stole it from the internet, but firmware is just software that's inconvenient to program. And the other thing that I found at Eclipsium was a bunch of folks that were just amazing. And I'm like, this kind of reminds me of like the awesome people I worked with at Tenable. And the folks I work with today are just, they're so smart. I mean, we wouldn't know a lot of things we know about firmware insecurity if it wasn't for some of my coworkers. And so I made the decision to leave Cyber Risk Alliance and flip it back, right? So I work full time for Eclipsium, and now the podcasting is back to, I'm a consultant for the Cyber Risk Alliance doing podcasts and like sysadmin stuff too, which is kind of ironic. I always like to keep my hands dirty in the sysadmin realm, so I maintain a bunch of stuff for them as well.
So you're an evangelist now? Does that mean you get to run around with a book and like bang on the book and
hail,
yell at pulpits and
firmware and all that?
Wait, so you work in marketing too then?
I do. So I do report up through marketing, right? And I look at my role as an evangelist, which is a funny title, I know.
Yeah.
And I kind
Well,
of cringe and fight it a little bit.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, okay, no, this is what I do. But I take like really deep technical research, or even just research that's not deep technical, and I try and bring that to the masses and put that in front of as many people
Yeah.
as possible. So
No,
Well,
I get it. And the reason I joke about it is because if you've been listening to the show, like 3.5 months ago, I switched roles from a very technical customer facing role to a technical marketing role, right? So I'm still very
Yes.
much technical.
Yes.
I'm still very much hands on keyboard. I'm still very much like in the weeds of technical stuff. But marketing's in my title, and I always cringe whenever I tell somebody I work in marketing.
Well,
I'm the
you
only
being
technical guy left on the show.
Yeah, I guess so.
That. And you being an evangelist is actually perfectly appropriate because, and we said this the other day, no one's an atheist when they're updating their firmware.
yeah, man, you pray to God every time. And what I realized, like, I thought I knew some stuff about firmware. Larry and I wrote a book about WRT54G routers and their firmware and stuff. And then I got to work at Eclipsium rather, and I was like, oh my God, this rabbit hole goes deep with the firmware that's on your PC servers and laptops. It was just amazing how little I realized I didn't know. And when you update that stuff, man, you can easily create bricks. I mean, can I announce? I'm not sure if I'm allowed to announce it. I haven't been told I can't announce it.
Oh no.
But I'll announce it here on the show, and I'll try and leave out as many details as possible.
It's a
But
scoop.
it is a scoop, because I think I forgot to mention it on my show, the last recording we did for the year on my show. But I have been accepted to speak at ShmooCon. And so that's part of my evangelizing this problem that we have with firmware, and highlighting some awesome research that wasn't my research to begin with, but I kind of picked it up, and I learned enough about it to go, I want to present this. And the founders of the company were like, yeah, absolutely. Our founders are awesome. But I don't want to.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I love talking in front of nerds and regular people too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole desire to not lose your technical edge, I get it, because I was a technical account manager for 6.5 years, and then in March I became the manager of some other technical account managers, and I love it. It's a mentoring role. I'm developing nerds and stuff, but it's one of the reasons that I do things like run my own Mastodon server on my Raspberry Pi, and like SSH into my Steam Deck and all that crap, and do all that, because you wanna keep the technical stuff. You don't want it to dull out.
Yeah, I do everything I can to stay sharp. I'm writing one of my websites in Flask because the podcast software I wrote was in Flask. We can talk about that if you want, when you want. I run, because I'm required, like it's in the unwritten contract, I'm required to tell everyone that I run Linux on all of my desktops. And it's Manjaro, and I'm happy to elaborate on how awesome Linux is on the desktop.
Wow.
And that's, some of the things I do to stay. I maintain some of the systems at the studio as well, and I stay involved with the research at my day job as well. So I end up testing a lot of what research is creating. That stuff I can't talk about yet, but our researchers and developers are amazing, create great stuff for me to play around with. So
cool. All right, so we've already gone down a number of rabbit holes, but that's fine. I figured that's exactly how I thought this episode was going to go.
Yeah, let me know which rabbit hole you want to dig deeper on.
So I'm actually really curious. So the whole thing that got this started, the whole thing that got you on the show, was a couple episodes back on Security Weekly. You mentioned that you listened to our show, and you mentioned that it feels like a very earlier version of your own show, right? And
Correct.
that kind of, Jason mentioned it to me, right? And then I went and listened to the show to make sure that he wasn't just like leading me astray, because he wouldn't do that, right? And I was
Yes,
just,
I would.
I
mean,
I
no,
was,
of course not.
I then reached out to you because you were also talking about Mastodon on that show. So I reached out to you through Mastodon, and I think I was jabbing you about something you mentioned about the verification process.
Oh yeah,
on,
I got shit
Mastodon.
wrong, man. I got shit wrong, and that happens. I get shit wrong, and if I do, please tell me, and I'll correct it. And we did, and I just wrote a post about Mastodon, coincidentally enough. So if there's more shit wrong, please tell me, and I'll fix it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Mastodon is a very interesting switch from Twitter. It feels so similar to Twitter when you first log in and start using it, and then you realize as soon as you get past the surface, it's very different. A very different culture, a different community, a different set of mechanisms, right? So it's very I can understand why people are getting it wrong, especially people who've used Twitter forever. Like I did, and you have, and Jason has, and, right?
Yeah,
it's the same but different.
I mean, I'm
I
still
think it's
like
broken.
You think it's
right?
broken?
I
It
haven't
feels
nailed
broken.
that yet.
Oh,
If
right. No.
I mean, well, if you're Twitter and use Mastodon, it can feel like it's broken. But I'm very much a reluctant social media user, right? So, I mean, I created accounts on most of the social media. Like I can't do Instagram. Like I feel like I don't have enough social media cycles to do anything else, which was weird because then I added Mastodon to the mix, and I was like, but this feels more natural than Instagram does for whatever reason, right? And then what's interesting is I've been like reluctant about it. Like I know you should grow it and do certain things to grow your followers and all that stuff and post, and I'm like, what gets me about the social media networks is the amount of content you have to give them in order to further your profiles so that you can promote things. And I'm like, I just don't know if I want to give you that much content, to be quite honest with you. Like, why am I
I don't think that would work on Mastodon though.
Probably not, right?
Yeah.
No, and I
it's
think
a different
there's
beast. Like
there's a lot of companies that thought Mastodon was just like another Twitter. Like, oh, good. How do I start advertising? Well, you kind of don't, right?
Yeah.
Where do I host my account? Do I just go to some central server somewhere? Well, you can, but that's kind of not the model, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting how Mastodon is kind of how we ended up doing all this together.
It is funny. It's funny how that worked out. But so the whole thing I was trying to loop around to, and the reason that you mentioning that Iron Sysadmin feels like an earlier version of Security Weekly is because, and I've told the story on this show near the beginning, when I formed Iron Sysadmin, I had in my brain this idea of almost like a merger of two different shows. One of them was the Defensive Security podcast with Jerry, who ironically we had on the show last time we recorded because we were talking about Mastodon.
So good.
And Paul's Security Weekly. Because
That's awesome.
Security Weekly felt like a fun show where a bunch of guys folks, I should say, got together, had a good time, and talked about technology, right?
I mean that was my business plan.
To have a good time and
it wasn't even. I didn't even think of it as a business necessarily.
Right.
Although episode 1 was kind of pseudo sponsored by Core Security. They bought the beer for the first episode, but my vision was just, I want to get my friends together, I want to drink, and I want to talk security, and I want to record it, and that was the vision. And I'm like, you guys seem like you had that same kind of ideology.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I wanted to run the show. And Jason and I started this off, and that's kind of how we've run it since the beginning. We've tweaked this and that, but it's always been, let's get together, let's be us, let's have fun, right? And that's part of why I've never gone down like the deep sponsorship routes and whatever, just because sometimes that can lead to influencing the content of the show, right? And I'm sure that
tricky.
I'm sure there's ways to avoid that, but I've just never had the headspace to really work that out, right? So we've stayed the way we are.
I would hate to get a sponsor and then have to explain how much we love that sponsor, even though they sucked.
Oh, it always
Right.
That sounds so fake. Like when you're watching a YouTube video, like there's a couple of streamers or a couple of YouTube personalities, I like their stuff, and then they kick into like ad mode, and I'm like, this is such a turn off. This sounds so fake to me.
We've tried, and like, you know, the VPNs, the personal VPNs are the ones like everyone's like, oh, I have a podcast and this is sponsored by XYZ VPN,
Right.
blah blah blah.
Yep.
I'm like, really? Like, do you really believe? I mean, we've had those sponsors on the show before, but our thing has always been, I want sponsors that I actually believe in the products, right? I mean, that's
Right.
hard now with
Right. So like
having a master company or parent company is bringing in sponsors. Like, I still need to vet the sponsors to a certain degree. Like, in one of my litmus tests is, can I have a real conversation about technology and security with someone from that company? Because if we do, like, that's cool, right? And their product has to actually work and solve a problem for someone. That's always been our requirements. Be like, we're going to add you as a sponsor. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons I think sponsors may also come and go is maybe they don't come on the show because I'm like, no, like, we can't have that particular sponsor on the show. But then I do a briefing with them, and they're like, oh, like, we changed and we're doing this now, and here's how it works. And I'm like, show me a demo, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Like, yeah, you should come on the show and talk about that because you're solving a problem for someone in a real way. So let's do it.
The
the
only
Big Green Egg, they could totally sponsor Iron Sysadmin. I'd be totally cool with that.
Oh, there we go. Only if
I
they
like- I
only
like-
if they
I
send
like-
me a smoker.
I like the green egg. I haven't used one, but I went hasty bake.
It's
as
one of
opposed to
my-
green
now I
egg.
now I have to
It's
Google
one of
what
my
a green
favorite
egg
children.
is.
The Green Egg is a Komodo style ceramic grill
Ceramic, yeah.
smoker.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's usually, I have 4 biological children, and the egg is often my favorite child.
Mm.
So
I really
they-
I really like my hasty bake. I mean, it's similar. You got to build fire, and
fire.
you can do the with hasty bake. You can change the height of the fire. So you build fire in this firebox that is controlled by a crank, and so you can raise the crank up and down. So you put it all the way down,
Raise the crank.
all the way down
Bring
for
the
smoking.
fire up.
Bring the fire up when you want to do some searing. I like how we're like on a hasty bake commercial now.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
And
And you've got heat shields and you've got your water pan. Like, but it's, I mean, it's similar to a green egg. You're building fire, man.
right, and the Green Egg, I use the Egg Genius, which is a Flame Boss OEM, and that's a Wi-Fi cloud enabled fan that controls
Yes,
the temperature perfectly.
yes.
So there's nerd tech.
Absolutely. I have a Traeger too. I mean, people call it the easy bake oven, and that, I fully admit that. But like on Thanksgiving when I did the turkey, I'm like, I'm putting it in the Traeger because you know what? It's cold, and I want to be inside drinking coffee, not tending to fire.
Not outside in the
Right now.
cold.
Right.
we were out one day, my wife and I walked by a grill and said, "Ooh, it has Wi-Fi." And she rolled her eyes, and that's how I knew I was never going to have that grill.
Yeah.
No Wi-Fi
Well,
grills for you.
No
it
Wi-Fi
sounds
grills for me.
ridiculous on the face of it, but there's something to be said about having the algorithm control your pork butt. You put the pork butt on at 9 o'clock at night, and you go to bed,
Yes.
sleeping peacefully,
Yes.
knowing that it will tend that fire flawlessly.
Yeah.
You're not
Eh,
concerned that the algorithm's going to turn your pork butt into Hitler and it's going to kill you in the night? 'Cause
except
that's
when,
what algorithms
pork-
do.
except
My
when it does a
pork butt has
firmware.
never been. Yeah.
Except when it does a firmware update. So there was one Thanksgiving a few years
Yeah.
ago, and so I was up really early, because I learned to like have dinner later, so I didn't have to be up as early. But I was up pretty early on one Thanksgiving. I went outside, turned my Traeger smoker on, and it said performing firmware update. Now, notice I said it didn't ask like press accept for the firmware update.
You're doing a
No, it's
firmware
just
It
update,
freaking
kicked
do it.
on.
whether you like it or
phoned
not.
home. Yeah, it phoned home, and it was like, no, you're doing a firmware update. And I'm like, are you serious right now? It's 28 degrees outside. It's like 6 or 5 in the morning, and I'm standing there while a firmware update is happening.
You're gonna ruin
And
my
it-
Thanksgiving with your firmware
I wasn't the only
update.
one.
Topic
Yeah, I wasn't the only one.
relevant.
I wasn't the only one that was like, why is my Traeger doing it? Like, they picked very poor timing to do that. So now I've learned if I'm gonna do smoke on my Traeger, like a big smoke, a longer smoke, or something. for a
Boot it the
holiday or
day
cookout.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Fire that
right.
shit up the day before. Update your firmware, make sure that all is well, and then the next morning.
But
it's good.
that could have ruined your turkey day. I mean, a 0 day on turkey day, that's not
The
you don't
0
want
day,
that.
It could have been a 0 day holiday. That's literally a 0 day holiday right there.
That would be a genuine tragedy. And you'll note how he kept everything relevant.
It's relevant
to not only technology but to your specialty.
Yeah,
Firmware.
So
it's firmware, man.
So Nate, you have to cut these pieces out, and these are the ones that you send to prospective folks that want to sponsor us
Right.
to show that we can just build this right into the conversation.
Right,
Absolutely.
right, totally flawless.
The best I've ever heard of building it into the conversation was I listened to a podcast called Dark Dice. It's like a D&D style podcast. And a couple recent episodes, they kept going on and on and on about these mattresses. And it was just, they worked it right into the story. It was everywhere throughout the entire story. And I was like, wow, okay, so they got a sponsor. The whole thing was a joke. Wasn't a sponsor, but it was the best sponsorship advertising I've ever heard in the show.
Well, so I hate that too. So one of the things in building the Security Weekly podcast and having sponsors, I said I want sponsors that are relevant to my audience, that are relevant to what they do for a day job, right? Because not everyone does IT and not everyone does security. And I'm like, so we're a niche podcast. Like, you just gotta like have this like face-to-face conversation with yourself in the mirror. Like, I am not a true crime podcast that anyone can listen to. Like, there is a niche to my audience.
Yeah.
And so I said, look,
Just
our sponsors, our sponsors are going to serve that niche. So no sponsors like for mattresses, meal programs, like the whole thing. If you're going to be a sponsor on the show, you're going to solve a problem for a cybersecurity professional.
So
and we don't need more VPNs.
Yeah, right. No, you need VPNs for the VPNs. Yeah, my other creative outlet is the YouTube channel that I run, where I talk about Jeeps and off-roading and builds and stuff like that. And anyone who's ever watched any automotive niche YouTube content, whatever car you're into, you'll always find those channels that do nothing but review products. They get a thing, they talk about it like it's the best thing in the world, they move on to the next thing, just because they want the free stuff, right? And I've always fought to make sure that my channel did not turn into that. And it's probably cost me views, right? Because I actually have integrity. But the number of things I've had to turn down where it's like, hey, we've got, I don't know, let me think of one. It's like a cigarette lighter adapter coffee mug. Can you review it on your channel? I'm like, that is so almost related, but no. Have you even looked at my channel?
Yeah, and
But
I mean, we've even focused on like security for a business, enterprise security, right?
Yeah.
Not so much even personal security. And I think they've got a good fit, perhaps, with some Linux podcasts. And so when earlier this year, maybe, I don't know, 8 months ago, I started delving into Linux podcasts, and I realized their sponsors are like, you could count them on one hand. Like, the same set of sponsors sponsor all of the Linux podcasts, and it's a great fit. I mean, it's
right.
I mean, I don't get any money from Linode, right? But I use them, and I think it's a great product. And I think if your audience is Linux nerds, that's probably a really good fit, right? And I don't fault them for that.
Yeah.
I would
We went all over
review
the place there.
anything, just as long as they realize that my review is going to be real.
Yeah, that's
So
the
if
other
you
thing.
If you send me a crappy product, I'm going to shit all over it all during the show.
I got one. This was actually a company had reached out to me. This is in the Jeep world again. They make like suspension components and stuff, which is perfect for the sort of stuff that I do. I'm like, oh, this is great. I finally have someone that reached out to me. Like, this is perfect. I can partner with these folks. I can get parts I'll actually be able to use and review. This is cool, right? They happen to be Chinese, right? But I'm trying not to judge just because they're from China, whatever, right? So they have me go to their website and say, okay, pick out something that's below a certain price point. We'll send it to you. You do a review. Cool. So I pick out this thing. It's like a tailgate table thing for the back of the Jeep. They send it to me.
You didn't go for like the bumper nuts?
Yeah, right. That's exactly what I wanted. No, this was something I thought I could actually use. It's something I can actually review, right? I get it. It is a direct ripoff of an American company's product. It even has a photocopy of the American company's instructions in the box. And it arrived damaged.
Yeah.
So I contacted them and I said, look, I can't review this. If I review this, American viewers are going to know that you've copied this other company because they're very identifiable. I can't even work with this, right? So, they apologized, and that was the end, right? But, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, tangent, right?
But in cybersecurity, we've used that as an opportunity to help the company and be like, like maybe you want to sponsor whatever, like we'll evaluate your products. Like here's maybe how you should market this product, how you should change the product to help to varying degrees of success with said companies. But, we've helped a number of companies in a number of different capacities, right, get better. And that's more the exception. Like usually when we're working with a company, like I'm like, okay, you got a good product, promote it to our audience. That's cool. Right. But cigars is different though. Because it's very personal. And it's one of the things I've struggled with on podcasts. Like, what if you either like are approached by a cigar company or you find a product and you don't like it? How do you deal with the sponsorship, right? And I think the only middle ground that we found in cigars is most cigar companies produce more than one type of cigar, more than one blend, I should say. And so you can kind of find the one you like the most, right? And promote that. But it's also very subjective.
But
unlike IT and security.
Say,
right? Either I like the cigar or I don't.
Favorite cigar.
Yes. And then you can say that's your favorite, right? But I may not like that cigar, but other people might. And so it's slippery slope on cigars because it is very subjective. But I feel like in technology, there's a certain level of subjectivity, but not as much as with a cigar or whiskey, right?
Like, but they have religious debates there as much as they do in the IT world.
For sure.
I mean,
for sure.
Which distro of Linux is the best? Which cigar is the best?
God.
I mean, come on.
Yeah. I am really liking Manjaro Linux. I picked Linux in your example and not cigars. We can go to cigars and whiskey too, but I don't want to say a lot of distro hopping, but I had my frustrations with Ubuntu because it's not kept. So here's my issue with Ubuntu and many other distributions.
Here's my problem with all of you.
Right? It's in your official repositories, your software is either 1, out of date, or 2, the software I want is not in your repository. So in both those cases, I got to go find some other way to get the software that I want. And now I'm looking at an app image, I'm looking at Snap, I'm looking at Flatpak. Then I have a supply chain issue, right, which is a big thing for my day job company. But in Linux, I'm like, I have this supply chain issue. Who do I trust to package my software? I switched to Manjaro. One reason was because it's a rolling release, tends to be more updated, and my software comes from the community, and I don't have to rely on a Snap, a Flatpak, or an app image, or in most cases, God forbid, compile from source. Right?
Hey, don't you smack down make install, dude.
I don't. I'm not smacking it down, but if I don't know, in modern distributions, if you're compiling from source,
something
it can be dicey, man. Yeah,
it's a real edge case if you're compiling from source, right?
My first job as a real admin, right, not just a hobby. The guy that ran the place decided that FreeBSD was what he wanted to run his web hosting stuff on. Like DNS, everything was on FreeBSD. And of course,
that's cool. I like FreeBSD a lot.
I mean, I got a bad taste in my mouth from it just because of working for him. But everything is compiled from source. Everything comes from the port street. Everything you have to do from source. There's no package manager. Well, I guess you could call ports a package manager. But it's not really packages, right? It's just like tarballs.
It's like Gentoo. You're compiling from... There's like this spectrum, man, of like how hands-on you want to be with your Linux and or BSD or whatever distribution.
Yes.
I don't
that
tend,
in my opinion
don't want to. Right?
In my opinion, that's fine for your hobby OS, for your desktop, right? It's not fine for your enterprise level stuff.
It depends on your use case. Pretty much what I was going to say, Nate. Like, it depends on your use case, right? Like,
Yeah.
you may want to play in those waters, and that's cool. And I may, if there's a requirement to do so, but most of the time, I'm kind of backing off to that, and I don't want to go like all the way to the it's spoon fed to you like Debian kind of Ubuntu, because that frustrated me for the reasons I mentioned.
Yeah.
Maybe somewhere in between, and even Arch Linux was a little too bleeding edge for me and hands on. And the thing I liked about Manjaro that I don't hear a lot of people talking about is they actually have this test cycle where they take Arch Linux, the latest version of Arch, they'll build it, they'll test it, and then they'll come up with a Manjaro release. So it's kind of like a more well tested and more integrated environment than you would get from just Arch. And I think Arch is great, but I'm like, I don't need to be like that. I don't need to select and customize and maybe compile my own desktop environment. I want Manjaro to do that for me, and I want to choose GNOME, and that works great. But I want, like, the update that came recently was GNOME 43, and it solved like a whole bunch of problems for me. And like other distributions aren't going to see GNOME 43 for like a really long time. I'm like, I'm kind of done with that. So this was like and again, for me, that worked really well. And I think everyone just has to kind of find their own distribution that suits their needs and requirements.
So Manjaro is basically a downstream of Arch. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah,
I've never used either. I haven't used Arch. I haven't used Manjaro.
It's a great post where they there's a flow chart where they kind of show them taking the Arch and the steps they go through to create Manjaro and manage the releases. So it's a more well integrated and tested kind of version of Arch, basically, for the desktop.
My favorite Arch distro is SteamOS. But, you know.
And Steam is doing some amazing things, man. Like
I didn't realize that was based on Arch.
It is, yeah. It's Arch. It's
That's
their
cool.
own Arch. It's like a fork. Is it a fork of Arch, Mark?
Yeah, effectively.
Yeah.
Effectively. They just did a rebase with their last patch for the deck that dropped production this week.
Everything I've heard, man, they're doing awesome stuff, and they've got the last thing I heard is that they've got 100 developers working on Proton, which is the Windows emulator.
Proton's the compatibility layer.
Yeah,
the deck is the deck blows my mind. Elden Ring runs better on my deck than on my gaming PC, if you'll believe.
Like, how is that possible?
I know, right?
That's like you just said games run better on Linux than they do on Windows. Essentially,
I mean,
not just Linux, but this little handheld Linux.
I handheld Linux. It's kind of Arch.
It's an 8-core beast.
I know.
It's awesome, man.
I know.
Awesome hardware.
Games have run better on Linux for as long as they're not the emulated port crap that they like to put out because it's easy. If you write it natively for Linux and you write it natively for Windows, the Linux port will blow it out of the water every time.
Well, generally,
which is just just astonishing.
It's
right?
for
think about
it's for the same reason any service runs better on Linux, because the operating system is not as bloated in most cases, right? As compared to like a Windows machine, right?
Well, I will tell you, Jason, the non-native Linux stuff on the deck is amazing to me too. How well it runs.
Yeah. It's a lot of it does run. The shims that they use to emulate Windows have gotten really, really good. But I mean, part of the reason is that when you load a Windows machine, it loads up a ton of crap that you you don't know is there, but it has to run because it has to be backwards compatible with DOS.
I was just going to say that, Jason,
right? Like it's all backwards compatible crap all the way down the line. And as a result, because of all that emulation layer and all the other shit that's running in there and the heavy Windows UI and everything else, like it's the same reason I don't like running Windows servers, right? Because like, why does my server need a GUI ever? Like, why would you need that? And I know they have Core now, but like it's the same thing. Like, why do you? It's always slower. We run something on Linux. Same idea. Like it's so much faster. I can run 1,000 things on a single Linux box, or I can get to like 5 on a Windows box, and it falls over.
The only reason I haven't nuked my gaming rig and just put Linux on it, or like Valve you can actually do this today, but Valve is going to do a production level support of it. Actually install the SteamOS that's on the deck onto a regular Intel
I'm excited
box.
for that, man. That's awesome.
The only reason I haven't done that is the virtual reality stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's still not like Flight Simulator 2020 in VR, I need Windows for it.
I would. Well, okay, yeah, Flight Simulator. I would think you'd still need Windows, but I would say Steam games that use VR, like Steam VR, will probably, if it's not already, will be coming to SteamOS or whatever they're calling it, that you run on your Steam Deck because of the work they're doing on supposedly the Valve Index 2, which is going to be a Steam Deck based headset. Which is like crazy, right? There's a bunch of leaks and whatever out there, but
that would, yes, I would love that, because that'll be the first headset I buy, because I
I've
don't have a Windows box
I
refuse to buy anything that Meta touches.
I'd been wanting to get Valve Index for a while just because I want the upgraded displays, and I keep waiting now because I keep hearing about this information about the new Index, which is going to be what I just described, supposedly anyway. So we'll see. All right. So anyway, we've gone all over the place.
Yeah.
We've already been going almost an hour, although we did start a little late, so we probably have a little bit of leeway yet. Paul, I had this idea in my head that we'd talk about how your career in ops had led you into podcasting. Is there a story there? Is there really like Iron Sysadmin I started because it seemed fun. It seemed like there wasn't a lot of ops focused podcasts, right? Is that kind of what happened for you, or I don't know?
Yeah, it's a good question, Nate. There's a story there for sure. So, I was working in 2005. I was working for Brown University, actually, which is right here in Rhode Island. It's a great. I mean, the campus, the people. It's another one of those jobs where I'm like, I really miss working there because of the environment. Great people, great environment. I mean, a lot of people don't know that some of the early Apple developers came out of Brown's computer science department. That the character Andy in Toy Story, the rumor is it was based on a professor whose first name was Andy, who was there when I was there at Brown, teaching computer science. Brilliant.
That's cool.
Computer science. Yeah, amazing stuff.
Jason and I both
Brown.
have a history in higher ed, and I
Yeah.
think we'll both agree there was a point where that was a great place to work.
Yeah. So I started in at Brown University in 2001 as a sysadmin with a specialty in security, and it was amazing. And so I would give these presentations to folks on campus, right? Because you work for a university. A university has multiple schools, so they've got physics and engineering and English and history, and all of these they're essentially colleges inside the university, but they're like their own business units, similar to a large corporation. And so they would all get together, the systems administrators from all the different basically colleges within the university get together for a monthly meeting. And one of the things we would do is I would present to them what's happening in security today. What am I seeing on the network? What am I seeing in the news? What websites are being hacked and things like that. And so I gave those presentations quite a bit. It was a great knowledge and sharing kind of thing that was happening. In fact, one of the brightest security researchers in our field, Josh Wright, was involved in that community early on. And I think it was within my first month or so going to those meetings, Josh was giving a presentation. And that's how I met Josh. Josh lives here in Rhode Island. So it was awesome. But politics happen at universities, as you folks know. And they're like, well, we're going to change this meeting or whatever. And I wasn't able to give that presentation anymore. And I was talking to my coworker, whose nickname is Duck Sauce. And Duck Sauce was like, dude, you should do a podcast. And I'm like, dude, what is a podcast? He's like, well, you get this. At the time, Apple had just released
the
iPod, the first iPod, not that long, 2005. The iPod was released, I don't know how many years before. I can't remember the exact time frame. So I bought an original iPod from one of my coworkers who worked in the network group at Brown. I started listening to podcasts. I listened to a lot of Leo Laporte's stuff, the Twit network.
Okay.
And I was like, this is cool. He was like, you should do a podcast. I'm like, yeah, sounds good. I'm like, when we go to this
How hard can it be?
How hard can it be? Yeah, so we set up a mic, we get around and drink, and we talk about security. It'll be a podcast. It's going to be great. And through this network of university folks is how I met Larry Pesce. And I was like, Larry, we do a podcast. And he's like, Paul, what's a podcast? So I explained it to him, right? And I'm like, we sit around, we drink, and we record it, and then we put it out as an MP3 file. He's like, that sounds great. I'm like, we're all going to the SANS conference in New Orleans. I'm like, we should do a podcast, and I don't know, we'll call it Paul.com Security Weekly. And we're like, all right, whatever, cool. And then Hurricane Katrina hit, and with the conference got moved to Los Angeles. So we're like, all right, whatever, let's go to Los Angeles. And we were in the hotel that was in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, True Lies. Was it True Lies? Yeah,
no idea.
It's like 4 towers in the hotel. It's like a pretty famous hotel. It has a restaurant.
Arnold.
Yeah, it has a restaurant that spins around at the top. And we weren't in the spinny part. We were kind of in the middle that didn't spin around. And we recorded episode 1 of what was then called Paul.com Security Weekly.
That's cool.
And through another mutual friend, so like what started, like I don't know what would have happened had it not happened this way, but through another mutual friend, Sunshine, Jennifer Steffens, worked for Marty Resch doing, he did the Snort project back then. And she was like, I can get you an interview with Marty. I'm like, no way. I'm like, Marty's like my hero. Like I use his software all the time. And so we got an interview with Marty Resch at that conference, recorded it in his hotel room, and released those episodes. And like basically the rest is history. Like, this is kind of fun. Like, hold on, we get together every week, drink beer, talk about security, and call it like a podcast that's like essentially work. And we're like, okay, let's do this.
When you have to put work in quotes, you have to wonder if it's really work. It's work.
Work. So yeah, I mean that's
We'll
basically how it started.
Podcast.
It's a
And drink
podcast.
beer.
And so
and
we'd just go
talk.
out, we'd go out to like our friends. We're like, dude, you need to be on a podcast. And of course their first question was, what's a podcast?
How many times did you have to answer that question?
Yeah,
at the beginning?
like every
Come and
time
drink some
back then.
beer.
At least when we started, it was already established. Everybody
Yeah.
knew what a podcast was, right? Like
Yeah.
you could
So there
find a
was a-
podcast about anything at that point.
There was a tipping point. I'm not quite sure where it was, where we didn't have to answer that question
Right.
any longer.
What's a podcast?
But in the beginning we did. And so we just go to our friends and be like, hey, you want to come do a podcast? And so we had like lots of hosts that would cycle through. And eventually, like there was a time where we would pick a location for the podcast. And logistically that got really hard because we were like, maybe going to our place of employment to record podcasts off hours. We were going to each other's houses and picking, and we're like, that's way too much logistics. I'm like, all right, everyone just comes to my house. And we sat around the bar in my basement, in my house, and recorded the podcast. And yeah, that's what we did. And random people would show up, and there was always shenanigans. It was shenanigans that would happen, man.
Yeah. Jason, I don't know if you remember this, but way back when Keith was still running that Northeast PA InfoSec group that he was trying to start up, and he did that.
Yep.
He tried to do a podcast and then accidentally erased it. And you and me and a couple other folks were there at the restaurant with him. That was kind of the first thing that made me think I might actually try this. And it was like, it might have been a year or two later that we finally formed Iron Sysadmin. But
yeah, it would have been the best podcast anyone ever heard. But
if anybody ever heard it,
Keith,
and for whatever reason, like
Keith deleted it.
Like we always tried to do video, right? Like that was always big for me because I'm like, audio is going to be one thing, but I'm like, video is going to be, and people would sometimes fight me on it. I'm like, no, we need to do as much video as we can with the audio. And we would record like ridiculous videos. We had one of our guys was like a videographer kind of person, and we'd have him recording us doing all kinds of ridiculous stuff, like before YouTube like blew up, before TikTok. I mean, this is like, Larry and I were, we didn't have shirts on, and we were standing there recording like a hack naked kind of promo because that was like our slogan. We were recording that, and like pizza was being delivered, and my dog got loose and knocked over a plant, and Larry and I had no shirts on, and we didn't gonna go upstairs and like freak out the delivery driver. Like there was just we would get all kinds of old technology, like laptops and stuff. And Larry is a builder. So my partner in crime for podcasting for the past 17 years has been Larry Pesci. And Larry's a builder. Like he's a maker. He can build anything. And he was like, I can build potato cannons like there's no tomorrow. And so he would build all these potato cannons. I'm like, dude, we need to. I don't even know how we came up with the idea. I'm like, let's just get a bunch of old laptops and let's shoot them with potato cannons. He's like, everyone's like, hell yeah.
Seems legit.
And yeah,
Why not? It sounds like great content.
right? We film it and we put it out there, and there's like pictures and video. Like I still have the pictures. They come up on my Google smart devices, right? In my picture roll. And it's like me, like younger Paul holding potato cannons with Larry and like exploding laptops everywhere. And it was hilarious. We had a hearse. We put one of our hosts was called Twitchy. That was his name was Twitchy. And Larry had a hearse. Like I don't he at some point in his life bought a hearse that had an actual coffin in it. And so we put Twitchy
Sounds very Larry.
Was the coffin
Yeah.
empty?
It was empty.
Okay, good.
Until we put Twitchy in it and we cut a video of like Twitchy coming out of the coffin. It was craziness back in the day, man. At one time there was Jackalope is a DJ. She does a lot of stuff for DEF CON and such. She was DJing live in my basement for a special episode while like my wife was trying to sleep. It was crazy. There's been there was we would melt thermite through electronics and film it, just like destroy
Just to see what would happen?
electronics. You just see what would happen. And we do all day episodes, and there'd be like melted electronics and vomit in my backyard. All of this kind of led up to my wife at some like I'm surprised now that I describe all this stuff. Like I'm surprised it didn't happen earlier. My wife kicking us out and going, "You need to get a studio and go do all this."
You can't do this in the backyard anymore.
Take all these shit. My backyard, it would be covered in like there'd be like pieces of keyboard, like keycaps everywhere, PCs melted in thermite, routers with like axe, like that have been like slayed with an axe in my backyard. It was chaos.
Our when we were at the college, our web team managed a Google search appliance that was hosted on site, and they had such trouble with the dang thing that when Google decommissioned it, Google didn't want it back, so they took it to one of their homes and they smashed it with like whatever they could find. Very Office Space style. I don't know if they played the song too, but yeah,
we did a lot of that. And then speaking of ShmooCon, so Larry basically took his knowledge of potato cannons and applied it to a shmooball launcher. And I was thinking about this the other day because I'm like really excited to go back to ShmooCon. So Larry had ultimately the last year they allowed him. I think this might have been the last year they allowed shmooballs, to be quite honest. So Larry had this car, like this kids radio controlled car, like a Jeep for the like kids ride in, and he had a turret on it with a shmooball cannon, and it was all remotely controlled. And he had built multiple potato cannons and shmooball cannons, so they were the foam kind of stress balls at ShmooCon. He had built a lot of those prototypes. Someone basically had a leaf blower one year and converted it into something that would shoot shmooballs at people. Because if you disagreed with the presenter at the time, you would throw shmooballs at them. So then they started coming up with these ways to be creative about how to send as many shmooballs as possible at the presenter. This culminated in Larry's remote-controlled vehicle that had a turret that would launch a shmooball at something ridiculous, like 400 feet per second. I mean, it was deadly. So we get to ShmooCon. Larry has to drive the thing to ShmooCon. We get to ShmooCon, and Bruce Potter is up there. I think he was like introducing a talk or something. It was like the debut of Larry's shmooball cannon, and Larry fires a shmooball at Bruce Potter at like 400 feet per second, and it goes thwap, and it hits Bruce like right in the rib cage. And I'm like, dude, you just killed Bruce Potter.
That
I'm
sounds
like,
dangerous.
I'm like, I think he's dead. Like, you're just like, this wasn't the point of this experiment, Larry. Like, what just happened? And Bruce is like, I'm like, Bruce, we're really sorry. I didn't mean to. Larry didn't mean to almost kill you, man. Like, I'm sorry.
Assume some of us don't know the composition of a shmoo ball.
It's like a stress ball. It was like a
yeah. That's a little
like
better.
A squishy, yeah. But like at 400 feet per second, that shit hurts.
So you mean a stress ball? Okay.
Yeah. And like I'm pretty sure after that is when
It's
they said no more shmoo balls. No more shmoo balls is what.
This is why we can't have nice things, Paul.
This is why we can't have nice things. Yes.
Basically, he built a friggin' railgun.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
There's a whole. I mean, that story. Larry got Mudge's attention with that launched DARPA Fast Track project. That was a federal project to give money to makers like Larry to do research and do. Because Larry gave a presentation on it. It was like, I had to fund like basically like $2,000 or $3,000 or whatever it was, thousands of dollars, not like maybe two, like not a lot. He's like, I paid for this all out of pocket.
Isn't that the program that got Georgia her start?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. A lot of people got their start.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mudge was like, I can fund a federal program so that you don't have to pay for the stuff out of pocket and can do cool research.
That's cool.
So that's the whole backstory of the whole thing. Research. But
All right, so we've gone all over the place at this point. It has been an hour now. Maybe we should go to break. Anybody? I guess there's been a ton of chat, folks. I mentioned Owncast earlier. We actually have Owncast live. If anybody wants to try it out, owncast.ironsysadmin.com.
Yet another layer.
There's chat there. This is all just an experiment for me. This may not live forever, but I'm curious if people want to try it. So
research.
If anybody's watching on either Twitch or YouTube and you want to try out Owncast, head on over there. The stream's live there too. But we've had a ton of chat in all three platforms at this point. I really got to find a way to consolidate those so that I can chat in one place and not have to go crazy looking at three different sources. But at any rate, where I was going with that is if anybody in chat has any questions for Paul, go ahead and throw them in there and we'll try to get to them. Jason or Mark, you've been very interactive here with Paul, but if you have anything you want to chat about before we close up and move on to the second half of the show, feel free to do that now. Any burning questions?
I'm all right.
All I got here is someone saying that Owncast is
when
working cool.
When are the new whiskey and shot glasses coming out?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So we've made a lot of stuff over the years to give out. I think someone in the chat was talking about hack naked shirts. I'd love to send you. I still have a few like in storage. I'd love to send you those. We have made up shot glasses and things like that. Not recently, so I'd love to hear like what people want, and I'll do my best to push that and have some stuff to give out to people. But yeah, we've made up everything from t-shirts to shot glasses, lens cloths, all kinds of stuff over the years.
Did you have a series of because I have one in the other room, the Whopper whiskey glasses. It says shall we play a game?
We had whiskey.
Wasn't there a whole set? Was there supposed to be a whole set of them, or a whole bunch of different sayings on them?
There was. I think they said "Hack the Planet" and "Shall we play a game," which is interesting. If you hit our YouTube channel on Security Weekly, we did about 250 trivia questions live on the air with myself and most of our podcast hosts on the Security Weekly network. It was one of the most fun podcasts I've ever done, to be honest. Because
the pictures might be misleading.
Yes, and it was so awesome.
My.
But a lot of the questions were focused on hacker movies, so hackers, sneakers, and war games. We had questions, and we love those movies so much that we had glasses printed with that stuff on them. Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. That's one of your new 5 questions of Security Weekly now, isn't it? I remember the old
Yes.
questions got
We had to-
retired,
we-
I guess.
we had to keep up with the times, man. you
Yeah,
know?
right. I always wondered when that was going to change.
Yeah, it was nature. You know, it's
Yeah.
just a natural progression. We had to change it.
Nature.
Yep.
So we have a question from Jay Scar, and he says, as one of the early InfoSec podcasters, I'm assuming he means you, not him.
Yeah.
What would be your suggestion for folks wanting to get into podcasting now?
Oh, I first just do it. You know what I mean? Like, don't.
Do it now.
So
To quote Arnold,
I have a
do it
I have a-
now.
I have a spreadsheet with over 80 cybersecurity podcasts on it. But I don't want that to dissuade people from creating new podcasts and new takes on IT and security. Like, just do it. And when you do it, come up with a plan to find your niche, right? Don't worry about appealing to everyone. Appeal to your niche. And definitely do it. You know, don't let the kind of flooded market dissuade you. And the technology today to create a podcast is way better than the technology.
Oh, heck
was,
yeah.
15 years ago.
It's better than it was 5
Oh.
years ago when we started.
Oh, heck
Things
yeah,
like
heck yeah.
Riverside didn't exist then, and that's
Correct.
what makes recording this show a breeze now.
Yeah.
Ask Jason
And
how much of
so
a pain in the ass it was the first time we recorded.
I listen to most of the cybersecurity podcasts out there, and I cycle through them, and so I still think there's niches that need to be filled. I think everyone loves a good story.
Yeah.
So if you are a good storyteller and want to tell a story, I think there's no shortage of people that want to hear a good story about security related things,
Yeah.
as an example, right? It was interesting. I was listening to one of my Linux podcasts, and they were like, "Oh, I listened to this podcast called Darknet Diaries. Like, the way Jack told the story, it was really engaging."
That's a great
And
show.
I'm like, "Yeah, like you can totally do that. Like,
Yeah.
I get it."
Yeah, it's funny, and Jay Scar can attest to this because he's one of our coworkers. There's a talk that I built for B-Sides Delaware in 2018 about how I started Iron Sysadmin, and it's basically called "So You Want to Start a Podcast," right?
Yeah.
And I've revamped it over the years, and Jay Scar and I co-presented it to a group at Red Hat about a year ago, right? And about halfway through, right, I go through like how to get some basic groundwork laid. And then there's like a transitionary point in the middle of the presentation where I say, okay, now what, right? Like you've got your plan. What do you do now, right? And the intention of that transition is to say everyone gets stuck here because they're like, it has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just start putting content out there. It's not going to be great. Just do it. Right?
Yeah,
So
that's
it's great that you say the same thing.
Yeah, it's great advice, Nate. I think that most of us, like on the show and listening, whether we're in IT or security, we're engineers by design, right? Like, God basically made us to be engineers, and as engineers, we have this like kind of built-in notion that everything needs to be engineering complete, that it
Right.
needs to be perfect, that we have to account for every variable, that we have to account for every negative reaction. When it comes to creating content, you got to learn to put that to the side and go
Roll with it.
get the content out.
Right.
Just let it go, man.
Is he gonna sing?
Just do it.
You can't lead into your own.
Well, I can't. I can't trigger myself. That just
can't-
would not be fair.
You can't set yourself up for a tune. Okay.
No.
All right. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I think we are going to go to a break. Paul, of course, you are welcome to stick around, and I hope you do.
Absolutely.
Folks, you're listening to part 1. If you're listening to the audio recorded version of the show, you're going to want to listen to part 2 as well. That'll be part B. Just check your podcasting app or however you're listening to the show.
I think
Be able to get it there.
I think if they got here, they'll figure that out, dude.
You're
Like,
probably right. You're probably right. But see, this is the thing I
I
have to
hope.
do. I have to do to tell people so they know.
I'd like to think that our listeners and fans are
Right.
slightly more intelligent.
Yeah, but
than
you
John Peacock.
got to think about the new listeners, the people who just tuned in because they heard Paul was going to be on the show, right?
Ah, that's
We
true.
want to put our
That's true.
best foot
All right.
forward.
All right.
Anyway, folks, if you want to watch this stuff live, you can do so on YouTube or Twitch or perhaps Owncast. I don't know if this will be a regular thing or not, but that's a thing, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, just look up the Iron Sysadmin podcast. You can find us on Mastodon or Twitter, maybe forever, maybe not, I don't know. Or Facebook, just look for the Iron Sysadmin podcast. Actually, no, on Mastodon, look for me, Gangriff at social.underground.org. That'll be in the show notes. Otherwise, yeah. Paul, do you have any last things? How do people want to find your shows or find you or whatever?
Yeah, you can go to securityweekly.com/subscribe and find all of our new shows there, including one, and you can ask me about this in the next segment if you'd like, but I did create a new show that should be launching the beginning of next year. So,
new show, huh? That's
episode
cool.
1.
All right, folks, we're going to take a short break, 5-10 minutes tops, get some new drinks, hit some restrooms, whatever we need to do, and then we will be back as soon as I find the waiting page.
We'll be back.
I always have trouble finding it. Here it is. All right, here we go. We'll be back in a few, folks. See you after the break. Are you a fan of the Iron Sysadmin podcast? If you are, don't forget you can support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/IronSysadmin. Or you can buy merchandise at teespring.com/stores/IronSysadmin. And thank you.
Are you a fan of the Iron Sysadmin podcast? If you are, don't forget you can support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/IronSysadmin. Or you can buy merchandise at teespring.com/stores/IronSysadmin. And thank you. Are you a fan of the Iron Sysadmin podcast? If you are, don't forget you can support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/IronSysadmin. Or you can buy merchandise at teespring.com/stores/IronSysadmin. And thank you.
All right, folks, welcome back. Part B of episode 130. Paul's still with us. Hi, Paul. Thank you for staying.
What's going on? Hey, I'm happy. Hey. I did get a comment that someone said they wanted to try Manjaro on their framework. I run Manjaro on my framework, and I love it.
You've got a
Just throwing
framework?
that out
That's
there.
awesome.
I
That's
do. I have the
That's
the
on my
12th
list.
Gen, 12th gen framework, man. It's
That
my
is-
other than we could. So my desktop. I don't want to commandeer your segment, but like as a Linux user, I'm obligated to talk about Linux and my technology.
Especially if you're
So I've
running
got a-
Arch.
Yes. So I've got Manjaro running on my desktop, and my desktop is an AMD Threadripper, 24 cores with 256 gigs of RAM, which basically lets me run Chrome. And then I have a framework lab, which is a 12th gen. It's like a 14 core. There's like six or 8 performance cores and 6 not performance cores. Intel did that split of cores, and it's awesome. And they both run Manjaro, as well as my older MSI laptop. I say older; it's still an i7 with 32 gigs of RAM that my friend Tyler recommended during the pandemic. And all 3 of those run Manjaro, and I'm pretty happy. I mean, the 24 core Threadripper, it's not even it's a desktop, but like I haven't even pushed it to its limits. Like I can run as many VMs as I want, and it doesn't complain. And I can run Chrome.
Well, that's good.
And I can run, like a lot of people with Riverside, I've noticed, it'll max out some of the cores, and like I don't have that constraint. So
Yeah, Riverside
and I
is
think, like-
is a little bit of a hog.
and bang for the buck, man, in terms of like PC tech, Threadripper is pretty good.
Red
It's-
Ripper.
And such
like
a
it's-
great name, right?
Right? It's a lot of cores, and it
Oh.
supports. It crosses that threshold from 128 to 256 gigs of RAM, which is a big threshold. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the threshold of
Threshold.
I can run as many VMs as I want without
Right.
worrying. You know,
Ricardo's in
So-
chat on YouTube. He says he's watching on Arch right now. See what I
Nice.
mean? How do you know when someone's running Arch? Don't worry, they'll tell you.
they'll tell you. It's just like, it's just like vegans.
Like
it's
being
just-
a vegan.
Yes. Mhm.
Or CrossFitters.
All right,
Vegan,
yeah, CrossFitters.
Crossfitters and Linux users. Yes.
One of my scout leaders is a vegan and a CrossFitter, and
You know
she's a
that
good-
because they've told
Well,
you. She's told you. Yeah.
And I've done a terrible
The
job
scout-
with the notes today. I have to go find our list of patrons. It's terrible.
The scouts do like busting her chops about the vegan stuff, but she's exposed them to some interesting dishes. So
All right, so let's get the announcements and whatnot out of the way, and then we can go right back into rabbit holing into whatever we want to chat about. And of course, now my dogs have decided to go nuts about something. Happens every show. Anyway. All right, so folks, you may remember that our Patreon funds are going to the American Cancer Society, and I said that was going to happen at the end of this year. So I'm going to wait until the funds from Patreon for December hit, and then I'll have a total, and then I'm going to figure out how to get that to the American Cancer Society. That total is just over $300 right now. It's like $360, I think. So at the end of December, it might crest 400. I don't know. Yeah, it depends on what I get out of Patreon at the end of the year. So that is that. I will have an update for that on the January show, the first show in January, which should be the second Thursday of January. So I want to thank all the patrons that are hanging out and still giving us money, and that money, as I said, is going to go to the American Cancer Society. So name pending 197, Jeremy, Aranami, Andrew, Tatro, Bruce, Robert, David, Solemn, Linux Sys 666, Mark with a K, The Mentor, Mark with a C, Julius, Andy, Jay, and Charles. Thank you all for being patrons. Basically, once this little campaign for the American Cancer Society is over, then that money will all go right back into taking care of the show. So,
the booze, the hookers.
yeah,
the-
right, the beer that we drink, the hosting, whatnot. So, if you don't recall, the reason we're doing this for the American Cancer Society is because my mother-in-law passed away from cancer back in July, right? So from July till the end of the year, I said we're going to give that all to the American Cancer Society, and I'm going to make good on that. So that'll be, I'll have, like I said, I'll have a total at the end of January. Yeah. Otherwise, if you guys want to contribute to the show without doing a recurring thing, if you want to buy a shirt or something, you can go do that through Teespring, teespring.com/stores/Iron Sysadmin. Yeah. I think that's all I have for announcements. Jason, I don't want to put you on the spot, but shouldn't you have had like a conference to announce in November? What happened there? Did I miss it, or did it not happen this year?
No. We scrubbed this year because of COVID and decided that we didn't want to do yet another virtual conference. So we're in full mode trying to figure out how to plan for next year to be in person because we're tired of missing people.
Awesome. Yeah, I went to for the first time ever. I went to reInvent as a vendor, and I came home with the flu. So not COVID though. But yeah, 50,000 people at a conference was. I mean, there was no chance of me coming home without catching something. So anyway, that'll be cool. I'd be happy to see it back in person.
We're desperate to have it back in person, and we were hoping to do it this year, but you know, it just looking at the numbers and you know, we're trying to reduce the risk as much as possible. And by the time, you know, we could have done something. I mean, it's good we didn't because the numbers are up again.
Isn't that going to be true every year though?
Yeah, I think we're getting better at mitigations though. So we'll see what happens next year.
The thing, and I don't want to derail, but although I'm sure we will, but you may actually have some perspective on this because I know that you're involved in some information that's more health related, right? From some of the other podcasts you listen to. But yeah. I feel like there's this point where we have to stop being afraid of COVID, right? There's a point where we just have to live with it, right? Is that not true?
No, I agree, Nate. My wife works in healthcare, and a lot of my friends and I scrutinized all the research like in a very nerdy way. So I kind of have my thoughts and opinions on that, and so
like I was all for trying to stop the spread at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not just like that I'm sick of it. It's that we have vaccinations now, we have treatments now. A lot of people, you might even say most of the population at this point, have had it and haven't died from it. Yes, we lost a lot of people due to it, but
over 1 million.
Like, doesn't there have to be a point?
Still dying.
Doesn't there have to be a point where this is just part of life now?
Yeah, there is. I have this like some kind of. Some people may think it's controversial, right? But based on my research, my advice is like do your own research, which is hard today.
It is,
of course, right? Do your own research. But in my research, and part of my research, not that it's any better than anyone else's research, but part of my questioning was to ask virologists and people that work in infectious diseases. We happen to have a PhD scientist that came on the show like during the pandemic that specialized in virology. And so I incorporated his comments and thoughts on the matter into my opinion. The way and of course my wife working in the medical field could ask medical doctors, so I incorporated that feedback as well, and I put it in terms of almost like nerdy engineering computer stuff. And what I came down with is like when you get a vaccine, it's akin to many of us are building stuff for Christmas for our kids and whatever, and when you build stuff you get an instruction manual. And there's two schools of thought with instruction manuals. There's the people that are like, I don't follow the instruction manual, and it takes a lot longer. And there's people that follow the instruction manual, and if you do, it takes a lot less time. Your vaccine gives your body the instruction manual that tells you how to fight the virus. That's my school of thought. Like,
yeah.
And you can just, I'm not telling you how to manage your health. You should manage your health because it's you and it's your decision and your health. And I respect that, right? But in my research, that's the conclusion I came to. So I'm like, if a vaccine gives my body the instruction manual, I feel like it gives me an advantage. And that's, again,
Yep.
People are gonna do what you're gonna do.
Yeah,
Don't let me tell you how to live your life. That's not the point.
No,
That's my conclusion.
100%. And our thinking this year was like at the time the new variants had come out, they were pretty aggressive. There was a lot of people getting sick, and we didn't want to expose people to that. So the latest vaccines are really, really good.
Yeah, but Jason, what
and
I
they're
also found,
stopping-
my wife and I got the latest vaccine for COVID recently, and it
Mhm.
sucked, man. Like I was at a point I wanted to dial 911. Like my stomach hurt like really bad. And
Oh,
we think,
from the vaccine?
yeah, and we think it's
I got the
from
vaccine, and yeah, it's
My
different
wife
for
was
different
on-
people.
my wife was sitting on the couch the day after the vaccine, which is not like her at all. But then 24 hours later, whatever, we're living our life, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
fine,
see,
but-
I had a little bit of pain in my arm, and that was it, and it was fine.
Yeah.
So like
and that's good.
like
But
I said,
like, I don't want to downplay
it
that.
depends on
Like if
different folks. Yeah.
I don't want to down.
Yeah.
There
Oh,
are
no,
adverse,
absolutely.
There are
Yeah.
adverse effects
Yeah.
from the vaccine, and I listened to all those controversial Rogan episodes, right, that talked about that. I listened to all that. Like I take all that into consideration, right? Like I get it. It's it's information.
Yeah,
So,
so-
you take it in, make
so
your
the-
own decision.
I guess the point is that the latest vaccines were really good, and we're kind of feeling better about having it in person next year. And look, it's been long enough. We have to kind of take the veil off and just go do it.
Yeah.
Personally, I still mask everywhere because my wife is immunocompromised.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
I don't take the risk.
Like, don't get me wrong. I'm
But
not gonna.
otherwise,
I'm not
like-
gonna slight you guys for being cautious. But it's more or less just me. I'm legitimately curious because there's a lot of places that I know of that are still being very strict, and then there's others like I said, reInvent. It was like normal again. Summit
and
this
it's-
year is supposed to be back to like Summit, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
and-
I went to Kevin Hart, and there was no mask requirement
Yeah,
at all.
it's much better than what it was, and we'll see. China right now is getting absolutely crushed. Like the hospitals are overrun because they dropped all of their everything like overnight.
Mhm.
but
And
they
it's
they were
apparently running,
still-
like, super rampant.
they were still extremely strict up until that point, though, weren't they?
Yes, they were, and they had almost no COVID throughout the whole country.
Yeah.
And like a week later, like most of the country has COVID now.
So my like uneducated non-medical viewpoint would be, or not, I shouldn't say viewpoint, question I should say, would be, did it hit them so hard because they kept everything so strict so much longer than the rest of the world did? I know
don't-
that's
don't
hard to
have enough
say.
Information to tell
Yeah,
you.
it's hard to
Yeah.
say, but anyway,
Yeah, 'cause I don't know what vaccines look like there and stuff. So
did not mean to derail
Anyway.
us into the COVID podcast, but
you knew what happened though.
Mhm.
So the long story short, we're planning on having the conference next year. There may be other stuff happening as well, so we'll see what happens.
Cool.
And
So-
I'll make the appropriate announcements when I have info.
That's cool. That's cool. Because I know my kids are dying to get back to it. They always had a great time at B-Sides Delaware, and I want to get back
I have
to
a
it.
garage. I have a garage full of equipment for the kids to rip apart, so I would like to go back too.
Oh yeah,
You wanna get it out of the garage?
besides Delaware is great. My friend Josh Marpet and his wife Janice
Yeah.
are involved with Besides Delaware. Yeah,
Yeah, so I
Two-
talk to them all the time.
Yeah,
good friends of mine. Good
we
friends of
met
mine.
we met Josh at DerbyCon. Was it the first
First year.
DerbyCon or the second one? He was the
Yep.
voice echoing
No.
throughout the Hyatt.
Yes.
We went out to dinner
Yes,
with him
first year.
and a few other folks.
Josh is famous, and maybe just in my mind, for doing the Hackers for Charity auction.
Yes.
and I
Yes!
would always
Yep.
hear Josh's voice.
Yes.
And Josh
gosh.
always had very kind words about our podcast. And then Josh and I became friends as he became a host on our shows.
Yeah.
And Josh is still a host today on Paul Security Weekly.
Yeah.
And a
and
very
now
close friend of mine.
Paul can't get rid of him.
Yep.
Josh just
Now
keeps
he
coming
just
back.
keeps showing
He's-
up.
Josh
Keeps
is
on
amazing.
showing up.
He's great.
We've had him on our show once or twice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
he's
great.
he's a good guy. He's a good guy. Anyway, we've completely derailed already. I guess we're firmly in the chat section now. We didn't have any reviews to report as usual. So folks, go review the show if you have not already done so. We'd love to hear from folks. Yeah. So I did a thing. I'm on PTO this week and next week because it's Christmas time. And that's what people do around Christmas time. They take a bunch of time off of work and they be lazy. But I wasn't all that lazy. I took on an IT project.
Lazy.
Remember how I'm slowly but surely de-Googlifying my life, taking away some Google things that I had done.
I've heard of this, Nate. I've heard of
Yeah.
this, Nate. I'm right there with you because one of the drivers, I think for this, Nate, and I don't know if you fall in this camp, is horror stories about people's Google accounts being suspended. Like you take so the use case I heard, and I can't speak to how true this is, but I can understand the logic. You take a picture of your kid for a medical appointment, or like I take a picture of my kid and I send it to my wife, it gets backed up to Google, and they classify it in such a way that they're like, suspend your entire Google account.
That's been my concern about cloud syncing pictures from your phone since the first time it started coming out. Like, wait, I'm going to take a kid of my I'm going to take a picture of my toddler in the tub or something, and all of a sudden I'm going to be classified as a pornographer, right?
Yeah, dude, that's a legit. I mean, I just went through. So my son does wrestling, and I say that because I'm super proud of him. He's a freshman. He's wrestling varsity. He's always done wrestling, and his team and his coach is pushing him to wrestle. And it was a false positive, right? To bring it back to what we do every single day in technology, it was a false positive. He had a mole removed from his back, and it was a false positive for ringworm. And like I had even forgotten, so I'm treating it like ringworm. I'm like, dude, you need to, whatever your coach said, like shower for 45 minutes, apple cider vinegar, like you gotta scrub. It's basically a bacteria / virus or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
My wife's like, no, dude. She's like, that's where his mole was removed. She's like, you took him to that. I'm like, oh, yeah. But you can see the point where you're taking pictures of your children, and they're getting backed up to the cloud, and those could be misinterpreted.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep. And we actually have a news article later on today where we're going to talk about something similar. Not about child porn, but about pictures and cloud providers. But anyway,
my wife found some old you used to have the cameras that were disposable. So you take pictures and then send the whole camera to get developed.
Yeah.
She found some on the back porch from years ago, and it turns out that my kids must have grabbed them when they were playing around, and there were some nudes, and they were like when like one of them was 5 and the other was 3 or whatever.
Yeah.
And my wife was horrified. She's like, "Holy fuck! Like." The place that developed them, am I going to be turned in?
Yeah,
for being
Mark.
a pedo?
Mark, I was thinking about that the other day. There's a place not far from my house that used to have the photo mat, the hut. It was like a hut in the parking lot. Well, I don't know why I was thinking about this the other day, but there was a hut in the parking lot where you drop off your film, but they would also kind of censor your pictures. Like they would
I've heard
say,
of that.
These are racy photos. We can't develop them for you.
Right.
And I was kind of thinking about it like the photo mat was the censor in the same way that Google is the censor, which, Nate, I'm assuming, to bring it back to technology, is why you're considering things like Nextcloud. Nextcloud is one of the alternatives, right?
So I stood up Nextcloud a little while ago, and that's been great. I actually figured out how to back end it to a bucket on DigitalOcean. They call them spaces on DigitalOcean.
Yeah,
so that it was cheaper to do it. Right?
Linode has it in their marketplace as well. Yep.
So I did that a while back, and that was actually because Google Photos had done something where they were like, what were they doing? They were like lowering image quality to save money or something. I forget what it was.
Something. I saw all my memes on Google Photos. And
that was like the
last. To ban it.
It was the last straw for me because Google is famous for turning things off, right? And I'm just waiting for things things that I depend on to be turned off. Well,
Stadia, View.
Yeah.
Hello. I mean, the list goes. There's how many of them? There's like over 100.
There's my Stadia controller.
Yeah. Dude,
I got my refund. This is my free Stadia controller.
Right, yeah.
But anyway, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I was feeling really burnt out as a sysadmin, and I had like a really cool home network set up where I had a Cisco router going through a Linux firewall that would then do like VLANs and all kinds of crazy stuff. And my Wi-Fi was like, I don't even remember how I ran Wi-Fi, but it was something very homebrewed and cooked, right? But it required maintenance, right? But I enjoyed doing that kind of stuff. But when I was feeling burnout, I didn't want to come home from work and still do IT stuff. So I had turned off a bunch of that stuff, and I went with Google Wi-Fi because it was really easy to manage. Just do it on my phone. It automatically updated from their update service. If I was at work and the Wi-Fi went down, I could tell my wife how to reboot it, right? Just like, yeah, go unplug it, plug it back in. It'll come back on its own, right? Now that I'm not so burnt out anymore, I've decided that the simplicity of the Google Wi-Fi is now a detriment instead of a positive. So I went with Ubiquiti. And Paul, I know you love Ubiquiti. Jason, I don't think you're running Ubiquiti at this point. And Mark's like, what's an Ubiquiti?
I managed, yeah. So Larry and I wrote the book on WRT 54G routers.
Yeah.
It uncovered a lot of limitations in wireless routers in general. And the kind of tail end to that research was we settled on Ubiquiti. So I managed 3 sites on Ubiquiti. Larry manages multiple sites, including his classes for SANS, using Ubiquiti gear. And I think the story is the founder of Ubiquiti worked for Cisco and wanted like a more cost-effective way to provide really good Wi-Fi gear. It's all Linux based. Now they've had their security problems. We interviewed a researcher that had uncovered a bunch of vulnerabilities in Ubiquiti gear, and some account stuff as well. But despite that, I like the Ubiquiti system. So Nate, I'm curious to hear your kind of experience with it.
This all came out of I was trying to set up an AdGuard home DNS server. Right? Like that's what I wanted to do. And the Google Wi-Fi
was it Pi-hole that you
No, AdGuard literally called AdGuard.
Google.
Yeah, well, no, I wanted to run it on my own machine, right? And I wanted the Google Wi-Fi to use that DNS server, and they don't make that easy. You can specify a name server, but it doesn't give that name server to your clients. It like proxies it, so everything has to go through the Google Wi-Fi. So that crippled AdGuard. Because AdGuard has to know where the requests are coming from, so you can say this client can get to these things and this client can get to those things. All it saw was the Google Wi-Fi. Everything was that because it was proxied, right? So this is what made me initially think, okay, I've outgrown the Google Wi-Fi. Like I now need to go back the other way, but I don't want to go back to the home cooked thing that I had before because that was difficult to manage. Even though I'm home now and when it needs to be rebooted, I'm here, right?
Yeah, even I've done Pi-hole, and it does require some maintenance.
Right.
Like you're saying, Nate.
So with Ubiquiti, it felt like this might be a great middle of the road, and I'm sure there's other options out there that do the same thing. But Ubiquiti is the one I landed on, right? So I got the Ubiquiti Dream Machine Pro, which is basically a rack-mounted router switch, right? You plug your internet into it, and then it'll control APs. It'll even do like home security and stuff. I think it'll do VoIP. There was a third thing it did.
Yeah, Tyler Robinson on our team has he's all in on Ubiquiti with the Dream Machine, the cameras, the whole thing, yeah.
But the cool thing is you can define networks in there, and this isn't just like kiddie play school networks. These are legit VLANs that you can then hand off and trunk to other gear. So I've got a Cisco PoE switch, which I have the APs powered off of, and then I have VLAN trunks set up back to the Ubiquiti Dream Machine.
Yeah.
So now I can have things like
Ubiquiti support 8021Q trunking.
Right.
So they understand trunks. Yeah.
Just like that, Mark. So now I can have a lab network, which that was the other problem with Google Wi-Fi. It was all one network, flat, basically. Like all of my VMs, all my workstations, all my TVs and smart lights and whatever were all in one big network. And now I can actually split those out into VLANs, which is great, right? Like my inner security nerd is very happy about that I can now isolate these things when I need to. And on top of that, I can have separate Wi-Fi networks for everything. So like all my lights and things are on a different network. My kids can be on a separate network, and then I can apply parental filters to that network, right? So this brings me back to what I was trying to do with AdGuard, right? Yeah. Back to the beginning.
The problem I've had with that, we've talked about this on the show, the problem I've had with that is you implement some kind of IoT device coupled with the service that goes along with that, and it wants your phone to be on the same Wi-Fi network as the device to do the setup because it's using multicast or whatever to set it up.
So I use primarily Tasmota-based devices or WLED, like the LEDs I have in my office here and the one that's behind me. They're all open source WLED. They talk to a Home Assistant server. All of those things are on my IoT network. My phone can talk to the Home Assistant server. My phone can talk to the IoT devices. I could block them the other direction. I haven't done that yet. But I don't have to do anything funny where they're all on the same network, right? So I don't know what kind of devices you're working with, but you're right. Some of them are just like that. They need to be on the same network to be able to talk to each other. But so far, I've had zero issues. I have a bunch of Roku devices for my TVs. They're all on my IoT network. My lights and stuff are on the IoT network. I've had zero issues communicating between all those things.
That's good. Yeah, we've talked about doing segments on during the pandemic because we were all digging into our home networks. How do you? And it ends up getting really complicated. I mean, Tyler and I basically discovered holy crap, this is complicated.
I actually
Let's get back to it.
I made so my kids have scribbled all over it now. So you'll see some my kids' math homework and stuff. But buried in there, you can see this network map that I drew of my home. So I made legit network diagram to figure out how I wanted to set all this stuff up.
Yeah, it
right.
gets complicated.
So yes, it can absolutely get complicated.
Oh, I think it's Bad Net Mask is talking about watch out for VLAN sprawl, and that he's on 6.
Yeah, I've got 5 or 6 already. But
I just moved on top of a mountain and nobody's around here, so I don't worry about it.
Good point. You've got a flat network. It's all open hubs. There's not even a switch in there, right?
I just have Cat 5 dangling outside in case I need it.
So yeah, a lot of this isolation and segregation are my inner nerd just having fun with it, right? I don't know that I never had a problem with it the way it was. Just in the back of my head, I knew it shouldn't be that way, which is why I did it this way when I stood up the Ubiquity. It wasn't the reason I got the Ubiquity, but it's just like one of those add-on benefits. I really like it so far. I like the configurability. I like that I don't need to have a CCNA to understand how to configure my Ubiquity stuff, although the Cisco switch that I'm using is a little more complicated than that.
That's where I got into trouble. I got the Cisco small business stuff, and it's not the enterprise gear, but it's slightly different. So figuring out what commands work on the small business stuff versus the enterprise stuff got dicey.
Yeah, this one's a Cisco Catalyst 37 something or other PoE switch. The college that Jason and I used to work for had them deployed all over the place. And then Cisco said, yeah, those, I don't know, how many switches were there? 2,000 or something? Switches that you have deployed, they're all EOL.
Yeah. Yep.
So take them out of service.
And we said, cool. So we did.
Yeah.
3780 or 3790, right, is what we used to run back in the day.
Yeah. We took them all out of service and replaced them.
But then they basically all went to a reseller they were refurbishing them and reselling them. And any of them that had this,
it's the ones I bought. I bought your refurbished gear
maybe
and put it in the studio.
Maybe all the ones that had the slightest defect, like a single port didn't work or whatever, they came back to us, and I got one of those. So that's what's in my network. It's the reject that the refurb folks didn't want.
Yeah, and that gear will run forever too.
Probably.
It'll be loud.
Yeah.
If I ever have to do a big network again, I'll use Ruckus. I really like the Ruckus gear.
Yeah, you've talked about Ruckus. I haven't seen Ruckus yet. But yeah,
I have like a client that I put a bunch of Ruckus stuff out at, and it just worked forever. Just
for
touch it.
For
it's great.
Prosumer grade Wi-Fi in my home, this is great. Ubiquity's been awesome so far.
Yeah, Ubiquity's good.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really the big thing I've got going on. Otherwise, I've been relaxing and trying not to do too many computery things other than play video games while I'm off. So that's been good. Mark and I both went and saw the Trans-Siberian Orchestra for the second year in a row. Nice. Just last week. Woo! That was awesome. That was a great show. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, that's all I got going on.
I've been trying to stand up websites. It's funny. I think I was telling you guys before the show, when I got on Mastodon and I wanted to be verified, they're like, well, you need to own your own website and put a link to your Mastodon account on your website, which we were kind of debating the level of verification that provides.
Yeah.
And I realized really quickly, I'm like, I sold my business. I don't have any websites anymore. I then I realized, I'm like, I have domain names that weren't part of the sale that are mine, that I could stand up my own websites to be verified. And I was like, okay, that was like realization number one. And then I was like, well, what web technology would I use to back end those websites? And then I started doing Google searches, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of stuff out there to
Yeah.
run your own
Yeah.
website. And so I ended up on, after a lot of talking to my peers and Google searching, I ended up on two different platforms. So one is Python Flask. And the reason for that is the podcast automation software I created was based on Python Flask because a developer early on had chosen that technology. That developer left, and I had to step in at various times and be the developer. So I learned Python Flask. And I'm like, well, if I want to keep my coding skills sharp, why don't I just go with something I know? So I'm working on a website based on Python Flask. And the other one was, well, I want to run a blog. I wasn't super excited about the Flask kind of blogging. I looked at it and I was like, that just seems like a lot of work and weird. And so
Work
I'm
is
like,
hard.
what? Yeah. So I'm like, what's out there that I don't have to? And Nate, you'll appreciate this based on the error you were getting earlier. What can I implement that doesn't need a database?
Uh-huh.
So there's all of these website technologies or web technologies today that let you implement a blog, for example, without a database backend.
Mm-hmm.
Jekyll is one based on Ruby. I found Grav. Grav, I think, is based on Python, but also uses Jinja, which is what I used a lot when I was coding in Flask to provide the front end. And so Jinja is like a templating
Yeah.
framework, typically coupled with Python, right?
Yeah, I had to learn Jinja for automation stuff with Ansible to
Yes.
get one of the certifications I hold.
I think Jinja is pretty great. So Grav was the other technology that I found that did that. So that's kind of where I'm at now in terms of my pet projects. Hugo, someone mentioned Hugo. I saw it, and that was another recommendation that I also need to look at, as because what I found with Grav was it's a great framework, but like WordPress has plugins, and we all know about WordPress plugins in terms of usability and security. Grav plugins didn't seem to work all that well. Like I'd be like, oh, I want a plugin that does that, and I'd implement it, and I'm like, that just doesn't work. Like it just doesn't work at all. So Hugo is Ricardo mentioned Hugo. That's a great suggestion as well. Is something to look into. So you got a lot of options. What I found today as to how you want to implement your website, and a lot of the modern frameworks today don't require a full like MySQL or
Yeah.
Postgres SQL backend
Makes it a
to
lighter
them. It's
deployment.
it's lighter, easier. I think better. I think better security. The jury's still up, but like I think better security wise.
It could be. I mean, there's less services, right? So
yeah,
that,
less attack surface, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And
Well,
that would also, I would think, make it a lot easier to repeat deployments, which is really like the name of the game today, right? You want to be able to throw it up quickly and iterate quickly, right? So if you don't have a database to deal with and all that stuff, right?
Right,
Yeah, right.
Static HTML, right? Jason, go ahead.
Right, they're all static. That's the whole point. Like there's nothing to attack. It's just it's static content.
Right.
You write your content, and then like some of them, I'm not sure how these work, but I've seen some of them where you can, it does store it in a format of some sort. Maybe not a traditional database, but it has its own format that it stores the data in.
Right.
And then if you change, the template or whatever, it rewrites all that static content again.
Correct.
And just blows it all out there and off you go.
Yeah, there was a Python script that was doing the markdown to HTML and publishing the site statically, which I thought was great. Because I'm okay with markdown. I think you get to a WordPress level when you have to support a user base that is of varying levels of technical proficiency. Like everyone can go into WordPress and create a post and use the WYSIWYG editor within WordPress.
Yeah.
If you don't have that requirement, perhaps you want to go to like a markdown language that then takes your markdown, converts it to HTML, produces that static site. And I was doing that with containers. Containers is another kind of fetish I have in technology. Like I love containers. I love playing around with containers. So it's like, oh, I can just publish a container.
Yeah.
It serves a static site.
That's
I can
kind of my
build
point,
container,
right? Yeah.
right? Like build my container the way I want.
Yeah,
And publish it.
For me, it's always this balance between manageability, simplicity, and the ability to integrate, right? So like Iron Sysadmin, the website that is, when I publish to things like Libsyn, it'll automatically post to ironsysadmin.com, so I don't have to then post, you know,
Right.
when I put a new episode live or whatever, right? And that was dirt simple with WordPress because it's just, yeah, here's the link, off you go, right? And here it works. Now, when you're doing something that's a little more home cooked, that's not as easy, right? So, you know,
Yeah, so it's funny, Nate, you're kind of segueing into the software that we built to publish podcasts. I was listening to another podcast that was doing something similar, and I haven't been able to like be able to publish it open source or make it available to anyone else at this juncture, right? But those are kind of like my goals. But somewhere along in the Security Weekly history, I basically wanted to automate podcast publishing. And that was like my sysadmin background, was I had the t-shirt and the mug that said I'll replace you with a very small shell script. Like I take that shit to heart, right? Like I want to automate as much as I can. And so we created this software that helped automate podcast publishing. And as I said before, the original developer did it in Python Flask. And that eventually grew to where like all paths kind of led back to this software, which you guys got a kick out of this. So I called the software PPWorks. And it was...
I've heard you talk about it before, so that's not a surprise to me.
Yeah, so the thing was podcast post-production works, right?
But your inner 12-year-old couldn't resist.
It was really my inner quagmire was like, giggity, it's called PPWorks. And if you ever saw some of the ASCII art that was presented, it embodied the PPWorks kind of style, and I'll leave it at that. So we created the software. The original intent of the software was, I have media or content, and I want to publish that as a podcast, right? So here's my media. Here's some metadata about that media. Go publish it to Libsyn. Go publish it to YouTube. Go publish it to WordPress, right? And then as we grew as a business, and we started talking about the things that happen before a podcast gets created, I was like, you need hosts, you need guests, you need a description, you need categories, tags, and all this other metadata. I'm like, we'll build that in. So it became a pre-production and post-production software.
That's cool.
It allows podcasters it allows our podcast. And we're working on, there's folks I'm working with today that are like, this is really cool. Like, we should bring this out to the market.
Release it to the world.
Yes, you should.
To the world, right? Yeah. So you can go. The goal is you go into PPWorks and you say, look, I want to do a show. I want to publish this episode, and this episode is going to have these segments, and these segments are going to have these guests. It's going to have these hosts, and it's going to have this description, and it's going to have this media, and it publishes everything. So it's the pre kind of planning and the post, which was its original intent, was really just a shell script, right? That would post everything to all of the destinations, right? So that's the software we created. And during acquisition, it was identified as this intellectual property that was really, really unique, right? And even when I talk to people that have done podcasting for a long time, they're like, that's actually really unique. So I was the developer on this project for on and off for a long time, but for about a year and a half, I was the primary developer, which gave me a unique perspective into development, operations, and security of a software package, which is how I learned Flask and Python and all this thing. Like I took it from Python 2 to Python 3 and in the whole thing. I'm like, that really gave me a unique insight into the day in the life of a developer, balancing bugs and features and security fixes kind of all in one. So I hope that this software someday gets more accessible to folks, but it's very much its goal is to allow you to focus on creating the content and less about the operations behind it and the publishing behind it, and automate all of those steps.
That's pretty cool. That should
Yeah, it's
totally
been
be
more
open
fun.
sourced. Come on, make that happen.
I know. I'm pushing for it, man. Like it'd be fun.
Nice.
Also, how I got into containers, because there was a time when I was learning containers, and we had this software that allowed us to publish our podcasts that wasn't in containers, and I'm like, this is a natural progression into containers. So like, one of my first container projects was take the software that we use on a daily basis in our podcast company and put it in containers. And so that's what really allowed me to kind of cut my teeth into containers. And now we talk about how would it live in a cloud native environment, and that's a whole different architectural. And those on the show and listening, right, know that's a whole there's so many architectural decisions that go into that, but it very much lends itself into that. So that's how I kind of got like really nerdy into containers.
Cool. That sounds like some pretty cool software. Pretty interesting and useful, automation. Now redo it all in Ansible. Then I'll be happy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, there's ultimately the technology is a tool, right, to solve a problem and accomplish a goal, right? It just happened to be built in, in Python and containers, right? You could put that in. You could go build that software, and you got to have the right requirements and the right goals in mind. You could build in anything that lends itself to that. So
cool. So let's see. Sorry, I switched away. We went down a little rabbit hole about PP Works. That is a hilarious name. I'll say that.
It is. There was a time, and I'm not sure. It's interesting because I've passed the development off to like real developers. I don't consider myself a real developer. Like I'm a hacker, and it's funny when real software development people look at they're like, how did you come to the conclusion to solve the problem that way? And I'm like, I don't know, dude.
Ew.
I'm a hacker, right? Like,
because it made sense at the time.
and like it works, right? And so it ends up solving problems in kind of unique ways. Which is, and I've told I've had conversations where like I want to focus on cybersecurity, but I don't want to be a podcast software, to the Badnet Mess point. Like I don't want to be a podcast software kind of person, right? So like pass that off to developers that do that.
If you could get that to the point where it is open sourced, right? You may have a community of folks contributing to it at that point, which might actually benefit you, right?
Yeah, so it's one of the things that allowed us as a company to really move fast, right? It's the software that allowed us to publish 12 hours of content a week, right? Like that was the challenge was, how do I do a podcast every single day and publish that and produce it in an automated fashion? I'm like, we need software to do that, right? That's the whole kind of mantra behind Security Weekly in terms of like how we operate as a business was, how do we do this in an automated fashion? And even if something took you a couple of minutes every day, when you're producing 6, 8, 10 shows a week, that adds up. So how do we automate that, right? And now we're looking into, like, my suggestions moving forward delve into AI technology. How do we AI generate the album art for every single show that we're creating? Now with Chat GPT, I'm like, how do we automate the description and the categorization of every single show? I'm like, because that's totally doable today.
Just like, you're not thinking big enough. How do you replace the hosts with Chat GPT?
That's a great point, Jason. You've seen a lot of people have tried. You've seen that. You guys have listened to it, right? Everyone's listened to it. Like, I've heard snippets on podcasts I listen to your point, Jason, where they're like, what if I were to AI generate the intro to the show or the content for the show? And the general consensus is like, wow, it's actually pretty close. Think about if you could feed however many hours of audio that I've published as a podcast as Paul Asadoorian. If you fed that into a machine learning algorithm, you could recreate Paul the podcaster. Maybe even Paul the
There's
person, right?
Yeah, there's a so Tech Meme Ride Home did this. Brian McCullough, I think that's what his name is. There's a technology that they were using. So he basically took a bunch of his stuff that he'd written and fed it into this, and then voice samples, and had it generated voice and content for him, and it was pretty close. It was impressive.
Jason,
So-
I'll admit, like I went back into our archives and I'm pushing the team to go back into our archives and re-release some content that we did years ago, right? Because we're like 15 plus years into this. I'm like, we've done some really good interviews that are timeless. One of them was with Marcus Random, right? Who gets a lot of Marcus is a great guy. I worked with him at Tenable. And one of the credits to Marcus's name, even though he's like, I'm not the person that invented the firewall, but like I was there in the beginning. Awesome person. And if we were to release an episode with Marcus, I'll admit, I went to Chat GPT and I was like, create me a description of a podcast with Marcus Random that talks about the history of the firewall, that involves hacking, that uses made up words that have to do with hacking, and go do that. And it was pretty close. Like I kind of say what it spit back. I was like, if I modified that a little bit, like I don't know that I would have come up with anything different. I think that was pretty cool, right?
Yeah, some of it's pretty scary now with a lot of the tech that's coming out.
Yeah. ChatGPT is I'll say interesting. It could be scary, right?
Right.
It's going to replace us all, right?
I don't know that it replaces us. It replaces certain things, but I think it also is a good starting point, right? Because I've kind of toyed with, what if I asked Chat GPT, the next article I want to write is on this subject. Could you write me an article on this subject? How close would it be? Right. That's one of the things I want to start playing with.
Right. Can you have it start making
close?
blogs and whatever. Yeah.
And if it does it get me? Even if it gets me, I suck at starting with a blank page. I think most of us are in that. If I gave anyone a topic in cybersecurity to go write about, starting with a blank page it's intimidating, right? But what if you got 50%? If I got 50%, that'd be awesome. Like, even if I got 30%, that's something I can build on and write a great article potentially. So we'll see.
So there we go, rabbit trailing again.
Chat GPT is always a rabbit hole.
PP Works to Chat GPT.
I think it's a great, but back to the image thing. I think the image. So I've used the image. Is it Dolly? Dolly, I think, is the one that Josh recommended to me. Does a great job because, like, my goal for PP, like in the vein of automation, right? When you're describing your content in PP Works and then uploading the actual media, the description of that content is a great job for AI. I could tell AI, go generate me an image for a podcast that's on this topic and talks about these things, right? That's all in there. And even your technical level doesn't need to be that high to go, I'm publishing a podcast like about this topic with these people, go generate me an image of this type. I mean, that could almost be automated. And then you've got podcast art that you don't have to have. Right now we have people that actually, then they do a great job. Don't get me wrong. They do a fantastic job. Like our hacker trivia episode where we went through 250 questions on hacker trivia. The thumbnail or the image art for that episode, like Goose on our team did a great job of generating it. I think you come pretty close, right? You can come pretty close with AI generated art if you fed it the right things in an automated fashion, which is amazing to me.
Definitely interesting times we're moving into.
Mm.
When you're having computers generate content, then you start to wonder what the people do. Maybe we'll get to that utopia where the people sit around and just look at the content.
We wanna be where the people are. Do.
I was groomed early in my career, from a coworker of mine whose name was Lori, and she told me early on, she's like, "Look, if you can automate your job and document it so that other people can understand it, your value to the company is so much higher at that point. So keep
Yeah,
doing that." That was some of the best
I,
advice I think I ever got in my career.
I'm reading a book now by a journalist called Always Day One,
Hmm.
and that's kind of the premise is that automating everything, you automate the work away so that the
Yes.
people can continue to invent. And like
Correct.
this is the whole the premise behind the book is this is how the tech titans are kind of staying on top and continuing to stay on top, is that they automate as much as they can, and let so that you don't really have people doing the grunt work anymore. It's just figure out the problem, invent the new thing, automate it, and then move on to inventing something new. And it's just a constant process. And that's how you've gotten the Amazons and the Apples and the Facebooks, and that's how all these guys are staying on top now.
Sorry, Nate, we're deviating from the script a lot.
That's fine. That's kind of how this show goes. But I guess we could rein it back in. Mark, I think it's your turn. You're playing around with Mastodon?
Hi. So I'm trying to remember if was our last show the show with Jerry?
I
Yeah.
think so.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
All right. Yeah, because since that time, I have actually stood up Mastomark on my Raspberry Pi 4. I had my account on your Mastodon server, but I decided that just merely learning to use Mastodon as a user was too boring, and that I wanted to like run my own instance. And right around the time that I did that math, um, there was a toot because I was on Mastodon
Mm-hmm.
from the Raspberry Pi folks saying, "Hey, here's an article about how to host Mastodon on a Raspberry Pi 4." And I looked over there, and there was my Raspberry Pi 4 that was running my emulators. So I popped out its SD card, threw in a fresh SD card, and followed the instructions that were posted.
So it's finally
Now,
happened. What you're saying is you finally turned off the emulation box you had set up.
well, I
The-
mean, I could pop its SD card back in whenever I want.
I just
to.
remember when you built it, you're like, I intend to keep it around to play games on. I'm not gonna just turn it off and repurpose it.
Well, the
Here we are.
funny thing is yeah. Instead, that's the station. It's become where I dock my Steam Deck when I'm at my work desk.
Right.
So I do play games on it. It's just not on the Raspberry Pi anymore.
Right.
The Raspberry Pi instead has spent about a month or so being a Mastodon server, and it's pretty cool. I did run into a few challenges. The instructions from the Raspberry Pi people were not perfect. It's a good thing I know Linux because I had to fill some gaps in. Uh, the biggest challenge I had was for the certs with Let's Encrypt. The default that they want you to do is to be able to self-host a web server, and then it goes to the URL to validate. And freaking RCN, they don't want people running web servers out of on their home internet.
Yep.
They'll allow you to broadcast on any other friggin' port. Literally any other port they let you host on, but not port 80.
Yep.
What I ended up doing is I use a service called NoIP. That's the Uncle
Yeah.
Mark DDNS domain that you go to the Valheim server with.
Mm-hmm.
I finally pulled out my wallet because I needed the next level to do the DNS where you could put text entries in for the records.
Mm-hmm.
So $30 a year or whatever. And I created the domain name mastomark.ddns.net, and I was able to validate for the certs using the DNS solution. What I have not yet done and I don't know if it'll work, is renew the certs. Will Let's Encrypt do that all over 443 automatically? Because if so, great. If not, then yeah, that could be fun. But I should over the Christmas holiday, I'll probably try to do a certs renew test before it becomes
Yeah,
critical.
I think it'll do it over 443 after you've initiated the certs.
That's what I'm hoping.
I think it will.
I have a philosophical question. I was reading my friend Jack Daniel. If you go back in security weekly history, right?
Not the booze.
Not the booze.
No, I guess
better than the booze.
Person.
Yeah.
Way
tall,
better than the booze.
Yeah,
big
yeah.
tall guy, gray beard, was saying that Mastodon is promoting the idea of silos. And I've been thinking about that this week. Is it really a silo, or like if Mark, in your example, you created your own Mastodon instance, you can still participate in the Fediverse. In like, how siloed are you?
I don't feel siloed at all because what I said is I'm not going to use a relay, right? I'm going to organically grow my network, but I cheated a little bit because one of the first things I did is I went to my OG profile on Nate's server and updated it a little to say, hey, you can also find me over here. I then went and followed at least a dozen people that I was already following on Underground, which is Nate's service.
Yeah, yeah.
And now what I do is I barely log into the Underground one anymore. I basically use Mastomark, and I at this point have enough of a feed that I feel the level of consumption is right where I want it to be.
Because it's all about who you. If you have your own server, you can follow anyone.
I can follow anyone. I actually followed you a little while ago. I show up as admin at Mastomark. I'm doing the worst thing possible. I'm using the administrator account as my Mastodon account on the instance.
Sure,
but who cares? Because
the servers are all connected to each other, and you can follow whoever, and that is what constitutes your feed.
Correct.
So it's not siloed in the way we think.
It's siloed in the sense that if you look at the local feed, it's just my stuff.
Right.
Yes,
local
I'm
feed,
logging into the desktop as root.
Local feed is what's on your the server that you're
right. So the only So if I ever want to go and look at all the shit that just I have posted, that's a great way to do it, right? But my home timeline is the stuff of the people I'm directly following, and then my Fediverse timeline, or whatever they call it, the one with the globe. That's where you see like stuff that the people you follow or boost, or basically the extending of the Fediverse. I have not had any problems being whatever part of the community, and people have found me because I use the hashtags. I've picked up
the hashtags. If I follow a hashtag that goes across all the people I follow on their servers, that was where I had a question. Like,
hashtag goes across the entire Fediverse.
It does not go across the entire Fediverse.
Yeah, like how does that work?
You have to have some association with them somehow.
No, I follow a hashtag, and I am getting feeds from people that are in other countries that
you don't follow, Jason,
on my server.
But
absolutely not. No,
not on your server, and folks you don't follow.
Right? Yeah.
But maybe it's people that the people like. So I follow Paul. He follows Nate. Nate has a hashtag. I don't see Nate for whatever reason.
But you see the hashtag?
Still picking his hashtags up. I don't think there's any. What I'm saying is, I don't think there's any possible way that my little Raspberry Pi 4 is globally searching hashtags. Mastodon doesn't do that.
Maybe I can't be certain, but I'm getting a lot of posts that are in another language, and I finally tracked down why, and it's because I follow a hashtag, and I was like, well, I like the other content from the hashtag.
All right, so I'm going to Google.
The foreign language stuff is a little rough because I can't read that language.
And if you follow a hashtag, does it put it in your feed? Like when you go to home, does it automatically end up in? It automatically ends up in your feed, right?
It doesn't mind, yeah.
Because I just started with the hash. I just started following because it was oh, what's his name from the WannaCry thing? What's his name?
Marcus
Hutchins. Yeah,
Marcus
Marcus.
Hutchins.
He's
Yep.
been a big proponent of Mastodon, and he
He
was
has.
recommending hashtags. I'm like, all right. I'm like, I got it. So let me follow these hashtags, and that should go in my home feed. So like when I go click home in the Mastodon web interface, all my hashtags should go there. And like how I guess my question is like how deep into the connected servers in the Fediverse does that go?
Maybe I'm wrong. I'm getting a lot of content. Like I don't get me wrong. I want I'm opting in for that content, but there's a bunch of it coming in that's foreign language that I was like,
All right.
I don't want to stop following this
Yeah,
hashtag.
like
but
it's like a
popular one.
followers
and it's,
of
I
followers
thought there
of followers
was
would be interesting.
I thought there was an option where
Yeah.
you could filter posts that were in a language other than the ones you told it to.
You can
you
what
spoke.
if you pick a what
Maybe.
you can do is if you pick the language, it will then show you only posts. Like if you pick a single language for your timeline, it will then only show posts that are in that language or other
Mhm.
language you specifically pick.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it shows all languges.
I
I
have to
had
dig
to
in
do
more.
that because I had picked up a bunch of German posts because of
Yeah.
some folk I followed, and I don't speak German, so
Mm.
it was a waste of time.
I-
I'm pretty sure, and again, I need to dig deeper in this. I'm pretty sure there is literally no single global thing that's spread across every single Mastodon server. It
Well,
can't
bad
work that
bad
way.
net
Well,
Bad NetMess says hashtags are global, independent of your connections. So
yeah,
I
Yeah.
think what he's saying is as long as your Mastodon server is ActivityPub connected to other servers, whatever hashtag you're searching for should show up. If
Right,
you've
exactly.
right.
added
You're
that,
gonna get
right?
you're gonna
Yeah.
get it on the you're getting it on the it's if I understand it
As-
correctly, it's filtering the Fediverse feed that you get.
So I got to click the Fediverse feed, not the
Right.
home feed.
Right.
but
Yeah.
but the
Right.
instance you're on, depending on how mature the spider web is, it's not going to have like
Yes, the server
it's not
admin
gonna
determines.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
You're right. You're right,
Yep.
Mark. The server admin determines. Is it a deny list or a block
you
list?
can-
There's a deny list and a block list, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. You can block other instances, you can block other people, right? So
it's just,
for
it's
instance,
just block.
I'm
It's
on
just
the
block. It's just block. Like
Yeah.
I get everything unless explicitly blocked.
now.
right. So
I'm sorry.
I think we
Go
talked about this last podcast, but Jerry's server has been blocked by a couple of people because he's allowing federal people onto the server. So he's upset a bunch of anarchists, I guess you can say.
Yeah, but
who are not interested in that.
I'm
So they
I'm
defederated him.
yeah,
They just blocked him.
I'm okay with. It's hard to have a decentralized environment without
Yeah,
allowing people to
absolutely.
make their own decisions about what content they want
Right.
to see, and that's happening on your server.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd be interested to understand. Like I don't often disagree with Jack. Jack has
Yeah,
He's-
it's great
he's
insights.
very,
yeah, no,
very
Jack's a good
wise.
friend of mine. Yeah, it's
yes.
great insights. Yeah.
And I miss seeing him, but I would love to know more about why he thinks that it's creating silos so that I can understand it. Because at the face of it, I would say no, it's not. I mean, it's not creating
Yeah,
silos any more than say
before we
Twitter
had-
is creating silos.
Before we had this conversation, Jason, I agree. I didn't have enough information to go ask Jack like why he thought because I didn't have enough information. So now I want to reach out to Jack and go.
Well, now I'm
What's the
gonna
reason?
reach out to him on Mastodon and
Yeah.
say, Paul told me that you said
Right.
Well, so
you said
but I-
everything was siloed and it sucks, which is a
So-
fair point. It's a valid question. It's a valid question for sure.
So silo has become a dirty word in IT. We use it
For sure.
pejoratively because someone stood up their own boxes or a group is not using the offered, shared services.
Yeah, but Mark,
And,
it goes
you're
back.
silo.
But Mark, it goes back into hacker history, which is like I think a stereotype, if you will, about hacker history that I've kind of
Mhm.
pseudo studied. That in the early days of hacking, people acquired their own knowledge of hacking through various means, which oftentimes involved a lot of illegal activity and talking within a very small group. other people would go along and go, oh, I want that knowledge. And the early hackers were like, no, I'm not going to just give you that knowledge for a lot of reasons. Like, one, I don't know if you're going to use that knowledge for good or evil. It's the Kung Fu movie analogy that I've used in previous talks. It's
Sure.
in a Kung Fu movie, why the student wants to go train with the master, and the master almost always says no initially. That's because the Kung Fu master has trained a student that has used that training for bad, for evil, right? So they're reluctant to teach the new student those same skills. And that early days of hacking, I think, is one of the reasons why we've created those silos. And I'm a firm believer in today's world, we need to break down those silos. So I get Jack's point, right? But how Mastodon works, I think, is something we're still all kind of figuring out. And we don't. My guess is Jack doesn't want to promote the notion of creating silos because we shouldn't be in that point. We should have evolved past that point and be welcoming to people in our field.
So my response to that would be the way you're describing silos to me, especially in the early hacker history.
You guys froze for a second there. Sorry, Mark.
Oh, am I still here?
You are. You froze for a second.
Okay.
Start again.
Dag. What I would say is there's a difference between actively withholding or blocking the flow of information, which is the type of silos that you've described. I will not teach you the quivering death palm. You're not ready for it. Even Anakin Skywalker. Skywalker fell. Yeah.
Oh, the Force is totally based on Kung Fu and samurai history.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Versus Mastodon and federated resources might require work to find people, but unless an instance is actively trying to not be found,
right,
the connections tend to grow and get organic. Now, I follow George Takei, Captain Sulu.
Oh my God, dude! Do you know my George Takei story?
No, I don't.
Oh, so I have to tell this now because it's one of the pivotal moments in my life. I'm out to dinner with two of the younger people that worked for Security Weekly at the time in Vegas at DEF CON. We're at the Paris, the restaurant at the top of the Paris, like really swank thing. And we're not dressed for the occasion. And to get into this restaurant, I have a hack naked t-shirt on. And they're like, you need to have a suit jacket. And I'm like, I don't have a suit jacket. I just came from like work on the booth. And they're like, we'll give you suit jacket and pants. So 3 momos are sitting there in like hack naked t-shirts and these suit jackets, and we're having this fancy French dinner at the top of the Paris. And I look over to my left and I tell my 2 people who work for me at the time, who are younger than I am, and I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, that's George Takei. And they're like, they look me dead in the eye. And Mark, I shit you not, they're like, who's George Takei?
No.
Like, I'm like, never mind. And I'm like, I'm going to introduce. They're like, what? They're like, you're gonna like go talk to him? I'm like, I don't know how many chances in my life I'm gonna have to meet George Takei.
Right.
So
was
I go
delightful?
up. It was delightful. He was, and he was with his husband. Oh, what's his name? Brad. He was with Brad, and I'm like, George, I'm really sorry. I'm like, but I have to say, like, I'm a huge fan, and I don't want to disrupt your dinner, but like, I would love it. He was like, it's totally fine. Like, he's like, what's your name? I'm like, I'm Paul. I'm like, I just want to have a picture with you, and I'll let you get back to your dinner. I promise. And he talked about his projects he was working on, and I have a picture of me in the restaurant supplied suit jacket with a hack naked t-shirt with me and George Takei. It was
That's awesome.
Highlight him, and he is the nicest person in the world for letting me do that. I'm like, thank you so much. It was awesome.
But and I was like, when I followed him, he had less than 50 followers on Mastodon. That doesn't really earn me any real credibility, but I thought it was neat. But my point is, because I follow him and so many other people follow him, the way Mastodon works, that's probably helping some data flow to me.
Yes.
Because my little server is going to see stuff, right?
Yes. If you boost posts of people that have a lot of followers, there's a thing.
Yeah. So what happens is naturally, organically over time, Mastomark will learn and grow, and even though it's just a single user instance, its
Mhm.
actual network will get bigger. And I have had people start to interact with me. I'm not sure how they saw me because of some of my Dwarf Fortress content, but I think that's probably because of the way the web is growing.
Mm.
But I'm going to research hashtags and see if they
Yes.
truly are global or if they just flow fairly easy. But just the way I understand the way ActivityPub works, they somehow my server has to find out about the existence of other servers
Right.
That's the
before
way
it
I
can pull
understand it as
content
well.
from them.
Now
Yeah.
you can use relays, but you mentioned that you're not using relays.
I don't need relays at this point because again, my feed is moving fast enough. And the other good part, and this is what I kind of like about it, even if it's a little siloed, there's a clear point where I'm done. Like, oh, I've read all the new content. There's the old content. Okay, I will get on with my life. And bad behavior, uh, like boosting and posting like inflammatory stuff, is generally not rewarded.
Right.
And
Well, there's no
it does.
algorithm. The thing I love about Mastodon is there's no algorithm. And
Thanks for the clarification, Bad Net Mask.
uh, what what pissed me off about social media in my entire life was the algorithm. I
Right.
mean, but also very rewarding, but also very much pissed me off because I thought I would have great content and the algorithm would show that to like practically no one.
Yeah.
And then I would have content and I was like, whatever, it's content. And the algorithm decided, oh, I want to show that to everyone. Like I have a tweet that it's a really funny joke, actually. It's a great tweet. It's a great, and it's a meme I stole from someone else. And Twitter showed that to friggin' everyone. And it has a million likes, a million impressions. I crossed a million impressions with it, right? But that's only because Twitter decided that that was something I wanted to show to everyone. It was basically like it was a Windows Linux thing. It was like, oh, like in Windows, like you can't uninstall Microsoft Edge. In Linux, I can go to Linux and go, hey, I want to remove the bootloader. And Linux like, yeah, go ahead.
I've
It's fine.
seen it.
Yep,
I've
Yeah,
I've
seen
seen
it.
that
right?
one.
Like
Yeah.
it was one of the most famous tweets ever. But I'm like, I've posted all this other content that was arguably
Yeah.
sometimes not as good,
Why was
sometimes
that stuff
better.
not good enough? Yeah.
Why just show that shit to everyone? And that's one of the things that one of the reasons that basically got me off my butt to go, I'm going to go to a new social network like Mastodon is there's no algorithm. Like, let's treat all content as fair, right? I don't know.
Yeah. So I had a point in there somewhere. Yeah. So it's been fun around on the server, and Elon finally crossed the line to me. I don't want to reopen the COVID discussion, but I have no patience for anti-vaxxers. I have no patience for people who wouldn't do the simple thing of wearing a mask because it inconvenienced them.
Mhm.
And Elon went full anti-vax, and I'm like, "Fuck you, I'm done." And I actually deactivated my Twitter
But
account.
Mark, to your point, I don't agree with any social network that's going to go to an extreme in either point. Like I want, much like open source, a free and open internet where we can present the information and let people make their own decisions. Right? That's what gets me about
To a point.
the corporate run social media networks is they seem to kind of take a like they have a viewpoint and they promote that viewpoint. And I'm like, why don't you just let the information flow and let people make their own decisions? Don't be anti-vax or pro-vax. Give us the information. Don't filter, don't downvote any of that information. Let us make our own decisions, right? Like there's always going to be, as we've seen in tech and in Jason, you brought up the point of like, what's your favorite Linux distribution? Like, what if we started filtering that content where only Ubuntu got promoted on the social media network, right? We need all the information to make the right decision for you.
There's a difference. There's a difference, Paul.
That's a lovely thought, Paul.
Yeah.
There's 1 million Americans dead, and had certain Americans taken the pandemic more seriously, there'd be a lot fewer dead people. There's certain things that are.
It's a bad analogy in terms of the choice you make in a Linux distribution versus your health have different repercussions for sure.
And when when your health decisions impact other people,
Correct.
that's when it stops being and every opinion is valid. So and people are entitled to their own opinions. They're not entitled to their own scientific facts.
Right.
I agree, Mark.
That right there is the problem. It's when they're opinion all you want, provided that you're not some Nazi hate speech piece of shit. Opinion all you want. When you're stating
when people
things,
tell me who they are, so I know who to
right.
avoid.
Well,
so they can have their opinions too.
Right, but when you're stating things as fact, and trying to lead people down a path with your facts that have been proven conclusively to not be facts, at that point, like you're causing harm, and I think that's where I would draw the line and say, like, no, that's like, you shouldn't be spouting that shit. Like it's not a fact.
Jason, that is an excellent statement as to the level of difficulty that a social media network, for example, has in regulating content. Like regulating content, man, is hard.
Yeah,
I think what you would find is that on Mastodon, that stuff would vanish very quickly because people would just smash them down and it's done. Twitter, Facebook, these social medias that are very corporate, very capitalistic, their algorithms raise that to the top, even though it's bad, even though that's the content that they want to squash because it's bad. It raises it to the top because their algorithms are designed to promote controversy. They're designed to promote something that's going to get clicks and
but
get
Jason,
people to look at it.
I think Facebook has gotten away from that. And I don't know if you listen. Again,
Facebook I can't really talk about. I literally don't use it, so
I know we need a more scientific study, but I think that Facebook and Zuckerberg was genuine in not promoting negative content and not promoting controversial content, right? And I kind of point back to a meme that's like, like Elon really screwed things up like worse than Zuckerberg. Is that even possible? Like I saw that meme and I kind of chuckled, right? And it's like, regulating content is difficult, and how do you let people have the facts and what determines what a fact is, and then how do you let people come to their own conclusion based on the facts? Like that's
I think
super hard to determine. Like what, as we all know, the internet today, internet today, how do you determine what's fact and what's not? Like fact checking stuff has gotten so hard today. That's one thing that all this stuff. Yeah,
it is ridiculously hard.
You're not wrong. I mean, I think because it's, if you're talking Twitter, Facebook, like those companies, those people can make their decisions and they can do whatever content they want, right? Like,
yeah,
that's just how it is. And whereas Mastodon, it's that way to a point where the owner of the server or the admin of the server can choose what sort of content they'll allow or not allow. The Fediverse as a whole can, individual folks on the Fediverse can choose what content they want and not want. So I think the ability to moderate on something like Mastodon is vastly different than what you're going to find on Twitter. And look, if Musk wants to promote Nazis and all this other bullshit that he's doing, like, fine. Like, they're just getting pissed off that people are leaving because they're taking the advice that they always threw in everybody's face, which was vote with your wallet. Okay, cool. I'm out of here. Bye. But now I'm a loser because I left, right? Like, okay, sure.
It's crazy, man.
But I'm happier over here.
Like doing a podcast for as long as I have, like, I wish I could go back and pull content from me trying to level set people and be like, look, everyone doesn't trust the government. And I get it. Like Patriot Act times, if you remember that, no one trusted the government. And I was standing up going like, look, I don't trust the big corporations, Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, Twitter. I'm like, they are controlling the information. And what's interesting is it all came back to remember sneakers?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Remember Ben Kingsley on the rooftop stating it's all about the information. What we hear, what we think, what we believe is based on the information, who controls that information. and I kind of drew the dotted line to, if there's a corporation that controls the information, they're controlling what we hear and what we believe in. And I'm like, that could go horribly wrong. And I'm like,
And if it's a corporation, most of them are going to want to monetize it.
correct. Their motives are different, Mark, to your point, right?
A government might be inept for whatever reason, but a half decent government, for the most part, is trying to provide provide services for citizens, and in theory doing things that are not all about squeezing as much money out of a thing as you can.
Yep.
Right. And you add to that everything is run by broken humans, and it's amazing anything works.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of broken humans, I'm going to pivot to the next thing. So
I'm just gonna say we should probably move it along.
love the Steam Deck, and I decided to do this little procedure. So I bought a 64 giger, and it runs Arch Linux, so it's got an internal 64 gig drive, and it has an SD card slot. So I have a half a terabyte SD card, because that sounds beefier than 512 gig, half a terabyte. And you can install your games or your other stuff wherever you want. But even if you install your games on the SD card, Proton or Wine or whatever uses two directories, one called comp data and the other called shader cache. And this is where stuff lives for certain aspects of the games. And these directories, regardless of where the game is installed, lived on the root volume. And 64 gigs used to sound like a lot of friggin' space. In 2022, it's not.
Funny how that.
So,
works.
like, I was noticing my root volume was like, I would start to get nervous and jerky when it would get below 3 or 4 gigs of free space, because I know what happens on Linux when the root file system fills up. It's never good.
Never good.
So there's this process you can do, and it basically involves moving the comp. You delete the shader cache because the games will rebuild it. What the shader cache does is, it basically, with the graphics card, it downloads precompiled shaders that are discovered. This is a very open source thing. When I fire up a game, if it doesn't have a shader cache and there's none available, the first time I run the game, it'll compile the shaders, and then the game will perform better. It won't have jitters and other crap like that. But shader caches are also dynamically shared with everybody. So as more and more people play the games, the shader caches end up being built. And because the Steam Deck is a known hardware target, you will see periodically that it'll download shader caching for games you haven't even played yet once you install the game. And then they'll perform graphically better, but they can take up space. So you delete the shader cache, and you got to move comp data, because if you delete comp data, you'll break game stuff. You move them to the SD card and make a symlink. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, these dummies at Valve pushed, and I use the production level version of the OS now, not the preview or the bleeding edge. They pushed a change that changed the mount path of the SD card to be in line with the way KDE expects it to be, because for desktop mode, they use KDE. Well, if all your shit hasn't been moved around, that's fine. But if you got stuff on the SD card, well, that becomes a problem. And Steam knows where to find the games, but it doesn't know where to find the non-Steam games that are on the SD card, nor do the symlinks work anymore for comp data or the shader cache. So I had to quickly fix that. Then they rolled it back, so I had to unfix it.
Yeah,
So,
I love unfixing it is something you have to do a lot in Linux.
Because they decided to do a rollback. Long and short of it, the Steam Deck is not the Switch. It's a damn good thing I know Linux. Although I did do something that a normal Switch type user would have never done anyway. Love the Steam Deck though. I got mine back in the springish, and I have watched it evolve just with the software patching. The hardware is beautiful, and just the changes that Valve has done with the OS level and the support games have been getting, it's amazing. It's one of my favorite pieces of technology I've bought in forever.
Mark, how easy or difficult is it to put like other emulators on the Steam Deck? Is that like a thing?
So there's a package a suite called EmuDeck. You switch to desktop mode because it's easier to deal with. You need to deal with it in desktop mode. You open up Discover, which is the Flatpak manager, because SteamOS wants you to use Flatpaks for when you're installing third-party stuff, if possible. You search for EmuDeck. Oh, there's the EmuDeck Flatpak. You install it. It puts the icons on the desktop, and then you run the EmuDeck installer, which then sets everything up for you. All the bullshit that you don't want to do with the controllers and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
Because again,
so it's like a what's the Raspberry Pi one?
RetroPie.
RetroPie. So it's like
But
it's basically
it's better than RetroPie because everybody running EmuDeck has a Steam Deck, which means everybody has the same controllers and buttons.
Gotcha.
So you end up with all the emulators pre-configured, and then all you got to do is drop the ROMs in.
Yeah, I was gonna say then you just go get ROMs that work with EmuDeck, just like you would with RetroPie.
Right.
Basically,
they're the same ROM. So I 3D printed this little carrier. And inside of this carrier, this is let's see, this is about 70,000 ROMs of arcade and Atari and all those other games.
Nice.
And so when I want to use my Steam Deck as an emulator, I pop the SD card that's in there, write meow, and put this one in.
Oh, so I'm messaging you when I get my Steam Deck and I want to run emulators.
Absolutely. Happy to help you. I love the deck. Couldn't be happier with it. And the only reason I use SD cards because, again, my internal drive is small.
Yeah.
I probably have the chops to replace it with a different NVMe, but I don't want to do the surgery.
Right.
Because I'd hate myself if I broke it. And then Dwarf Fortress, the game that I've played off and on for 15 years, now has the Steam version with a good UI. Well, it's at least a UI.
Good-ish UI.
And some automation to make it playable. Dwarf Fortress, if you've never heard of it, if you've ever played Minecraft, if you've ever played RimWorld, there's so many games that owe their existence to concepts from Dwarf Fortress. It's an amazing. It's basically a simulator, simulates an entire world, and then you start with 7 dwarves. I guess that number's on purpose, and you try and build a mountain home. And the motto of the game is losing is fun, because the dwarves are sometimes not that bright, and then horrible monsters will attack, and the stories that get generated as you're playing the game are amazing.
That's awesome.
So I've been playing so much Dwarf Fortress, and if you're interested in what that looks like, Strike the Earth is my YouTube playlist where I've got one of my fortresses I'm playing through. Woo! Exhale. But yeah, if you want Steam Deck advice, if you want to talk, let me know, man. I love it. How do you know which card to pick? I'm a big fan of the Samsung cards. Specifically, I go with the Samsung Evos, and they have never stabbed me in the back.
And you get good performance on that stuff?
I've run the same game on the internal drive versus the SD card, and I can't tell the difference.
Can't tell the difference. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure someone could benchmark and say there's a 10.7% dip at times, but human Mark can't tell, so I don't care.
That's what matters.
You know, if you compiled it yourself on your Steam Deck, you could get that extra.
We found the Gen 2 user. Now, what I do, I guess I'm not done. There's a gentleman at Red Hat who goes by the handle Glorious Egg Roll, and he forks Proton. Valve can't ship this, but he does Glorious Egg Roll, his own version of the compatibility layer, where he compiles in some more advanced fixes and stuff. So for games that are being persnickety, I sideload in the Glorious Egg Roll Proton layer, and I will use that. And games that have a hard time with the stock Proton versions, Glorious Egg Roll will usually handle just fine. So,
nice.
If you're a Linux guy, the Steam Deck rewards you in spades. I set up the SSH server on it because I want to access my Steam Deck in a terminal because I should be able to.
Why not?
And I have little scripts I can run to pull all my screenshots down from my Steam Deck to my Linux laptop for when I want to post stuff to Mastodon. Easy.
Paul, I could see this thing being this is a red teamer's dream tool because
it's been on my Christmas list. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I don't get one for
everything.
Christmas,
And
yeah, I'm ordering one for. Yeah.
Hack the network and play video games at the same time. I mean, you can't get much better.
Valve really hit it out of the park with the device. They really have.
I've been trying to groom my kids like this is the next Nintendo Switch. I'm like, you guys really need to get on board.
So
with
much
this.
better than the Switch.
Yeah.
So much. And the same game that runs dog on the Switch runs great on the deck. It's an 8-core powerhouse with 16 gig of RAM, and the video card subsystem they use is
so what you're saying, it's better than RetroPie. Like if you created a RetroPie, it's a better experience.
Oh my God, yes.
Oh,
awesome.
awesome.
The thing has balls. It's got legit balls.
My kids don't know they want one, but they want one.
and I love the Nintendo Switch. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah,
Animal Crossing New Horizons got me through the pandemic. Me and my kids all played together with their own copies. But yeah, once you deck it, the Switch is like, I'm sorry, old friend. You can't hack it anymore.
Poor little Switch.
Well, right up until those games that you can't get on the deck,
Right.
Well, and that's true. My son is huge into the Fire Emblem stuff, and that tends to be Switch only. So, but there's no law that says I can. Like my Switch is right here. I can pick it up and play it whenever I want. There's no law that says you have to pick one and only one. The PS5 is a little sad. I was playing with that a lot until the deck showed up, and the PS5 was like, ugh. But I mean, GTA Online, big TV on the PS5. That's the way I play that. Yeah, I could play it either natively on the deck or I can stream it via Chiaka. Chiaka is an open source stream package for PlayStation, right? But I'd rather play that on the big screen natively.
All right, so
if you had your choice, Mark, you would go Steam Deck, not PS5.
I love my PS5, but if Hans Gruber broke into Richter Tommy Tower and demanded that only one of them can live, I'm sorry. The PS5's taking a bullet to the head. Nice. Yeah. The deck is because the deck it's a Linux machine. It's all open source. The most closed source piece of it is Steam itself, right? And I get that, but the deck itself, the Steam OS distro, they've done amazing work. The Steam client is not open source, but you know what? I'm not Richard Stallman. I don't need to be that pure.
I'm with you.
All right, so it's 10 o'clock. We should probably move on.
Oh, my God. And I got to drive to JFK tomorrow morning to pick up Abigail. My daughter's flying in from Korea.
So, Jason, you want to give us some highlights on what you got going on?
I'm remodeling the house and playing some games. Okay, move on.
I see Cyberpunk is finally on that list.
Which runs well on the deck.
Yeah, I finally, whatever. A lot of those games I like playing in front of the big TV, so I just put them on the Xbox and I go. So I will mention I got High on Life. If you have not played this, if you are at any point a fan of Rick and Morty, you will laugh your ass off playing this game. It is hilarious.
I watched a little clip of it. It looked like a lot of fun. I just can't justify dropping $60 on it at the moment.
It is I have it on Xbox because it's on Game Pass. So I got it for free.
Well, there you go.
Well, I pay the monthly for Game Pass, but whatever. I get a ton of stuff for free. It is hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. It is completely irreverent. If you are a child, you should not be playing this game at all. Your parents need to be like smacked. But it's a lot of fun. It's really, really well done. I've run into one or two little bugs in the game, which is sort of standard for every game now. But otherwise, the gameplay is like incredibly smooth. And the all the mechanics are a lot of fun, and it's really neat. It's definitely worth looking into. And then I started Cyberpunk, which I was going and started playing. I got through the intro of it, and then High on Life dropped, and I'll go back to Cyberpunk after I beat High on Life because I'm almost done with it. So other than that, it's my wife is remodeling things. So I was sitting in my office the other day, and I heard really weird noises coming from like right outside my door, and here she started remodeling the bathroom in the basement. Started by scrape like they did a popcorn ceiling.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds.
They did a popcorn ceiling, and she doesn't like the popcorn ceiling, so she was scraping it off.
Yep.
So we redid the short of replacing. We didn't replace the shower or the tub or the vanity or anything. She did repaint the entire vanity, but we've stripped the bathroom and redone it already in like 3 days. So we're getting good at this.
That's my house, Jason. Yeah.
I don't know if that's good or bad though. Is that a bad thing, Paul? If
No,
you get good at it, does it happen more often?
It does. It does. And
damn it.
I don't know if it's
damn
a
it.
bad
I'm
thing.
gonna have to start screwing up a lot.
My wife had me take down the mirrors, and then I had to cut holes in the drywall and mount these medicine cabinets, and then remount the mirrors on hinges. So we had this like secret like safe behind both mirrors in the bathroom, and that was like part of all the stuff we had to do before Christmas, including building a new kitchen table.
How much do you charge per hour?
Right?
And will you travel?
It's a thing.
Yeah, there's a level at which my wife says, "Well, what if we did this?" And I said, "Well, we have a phone, we can call somebody because I'm not touching that."
Yeah, my wife just goes, "No, we're doing this." I'm like, "Okay, yes, dear, yes, dear, yes, dear" is the magic word. Yes.
It is until yes, dear turns into, here I've done what you asked. Well, it doesn't look anything like it's supposed to. I told you I wasn't any good at this.
Why isn't this done yet? I'm like, you do know I work in computers, right? Not construction.
Right.
Like, you understand this, right? Yes.
Exactly. Yep.
Home
so
renovations.
That's what's going on with me.
We're working on our bathroom as well, so it's fun. All right. Well, we've gone all over the place again. It seems like we have certain guests that sometimes come on and really lead us astray, and Paul's one of them.
My fault. all my fault.
Nah, it's fantastic.
But this has been
awesome.
fun.
It's been awesome. Guys.
They're
Thank you so much.
always exciting podcasts though. So
They are. All right. So now is the point where we move along into the news. So this is where I remember that I didn't actually open the articles up, but I'll do that while we're transitioning. So I'm going to hit the button, and then we're going to talk about the news. So this should be an interesting set of news tonight. We actually have more than normal.
Nate, sorry, I got to drop.
You have to drop.
Yeah, I got to let my dogs out and stuff.
He let the dogs out.
All right, so
Paul let the dogs out.
what we're gonna do is stop recording so that it can synchronize. So wait until your browser tells you that it's finished uploading, and then we'll start recording again.
Okay.
Then I'll cut this out. You guys get to see this live.
My recording was successfully uploaded. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry guys, I got to drop though.
Not
Oh, no,
not
it's
a problem.
been pleasure, dude.
no,
Not
that's
a
fine.
problem.
It's been awesome, Paul.
Yeah, this has been a
Awesome.
lot of
Seeing
fun.
you.
I would like
Base?
let me know when the next recording
Let you
is.
know. Let you
Let me know, man.
know.
What are we
Second
doing for
and
January?
fourth Thursday of every month.
Back.
Yep.
Oh, it's been awesome. Nate, Mark, Jason, thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you, Paul. It was awesome.
Thanks, guys. I'll be in
Okay.
touch. When I buy my Steam Deck, Mark, you're going to be my first contact.
Anytime, my friend. Anytime.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Yep. Have a good one, Paul.
Night, Paul.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, I just got to fix the stream once he drops out, and then we can get back to it. Do that, and then do this. And the lights in my office are turning off because it's so late at night. This is the downside to home automation. All right, let me get the recordings going again, then we can do the news. All right. Let me get my lights back on now. Now I'm a hacker in the dark. Ink. There we go.
Nope, need a hoodie.
Yeah, right. Need a hoodie to be a hacker in the dark. Okay, so on to the news. This first article, I don't want to belabor it too long. However, given a lot of the topics we've talked about in the past, this is perfect. It's just
Mute.
perfect.
There's my mute button.
Where's your mute button? All right, so this comes from the New York Times. Maybe you've heard about Donald Trump and baseball cards in the past couple weeks. This is crazy.
NFTs.
This is crazy. This, like, when I heard about this, I thought, what on earth is he doing? Well, it gets even better. Okay, so all right, so the story is that for whatever reason, Donald Trump has decided to release a bunch of NFTs that are essentially trading cards of him in these like fictitious I don't even know what you describe these as.
Himself
He's being
as Superman,
he's posing as
a
like
cowboy.
characters and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So there's like this picture of like what do you want to call this guy? Trump man, of Trump's head on a Superman type character's body, and it's a trading
Right.
card. These were selling. I think they're sold out at this point. They were selling for $99 a piece.
Of course they are.
Of course, they're sold out. $99 a piece, and I guess he, like the day before, made an announcement. Said he was going to have this big announcement tomorrow, right? And everyone's like, "Oh, ooh, what's he going to announce? What's he going to announce?" Right? And the announcement was these stupid NFTs. And
that's redundant. Stupid NFT.
yeah, and then on top of that, the money. So you would think, oh, this is some way to get campaign money or something. No, it goes directly to him. It's like just pay Donald Trump $99 for an NFT, which is essentially a fictitious piece of property, right? Sure, there's a record somewhere that says you own this NFT, but do you really own it? We've talked about this in the past. NFTs seem like a bunch of bullshit. I cannot understand what this is other than a money grab.
It's a money grab. If you're interested in exactly what these NFTs are and how they worked and what they were comprised of and what it pointed to and all that other bullshit, Rob Graham on Twitter, and I think he did it on Mastodon as well, did a complete teardown of one of the NFTs, where the wallet came from, how it got populated, what exactly that NFT quote unquote points to. Turns out these NFTs are, I mean, it's Trump, so it's cheap bullshit. They created a set of backgrounds. They created a set of outfits. They created a set of hats. They created a set of, there's like 4 or 5 different fields. And the back end of the NFT, what it points to is metadata that is a JSON array of the 5 values of what your NFT was. So it's the red baseball cap with the star background, with the superhero outfit, with this shoes and like whatever. So that's what you bought. Congratulations on wasting $100.
Congratulations, you own some JSON data.
Yep. It doesn't even point to a picture. Most of these point to a link that is the picture. This points to a link that is JSON data. It's whatever. You deserve to lose your money, you idiots.
So at any rate, it's ridiculous, and it doesn't go to his campaign even. Which, like, even if you do support the man, right? You'd think, oh yeah, I'm contributing to his campaign because I want to see him win again. God, I don't know why you'd want to see that, but whatever. Maybe you're one of those people. You're not. You're contributing directly to Donald Trump. Here, have some money, Donald Trump. Light it on fire. Do whatever you do with it. The whole thing, there are people in the political space, there's even conservatives who, like, you might argue are on the man's side, are like, what the hell is he doing? This is ridiculous. right? And then when you go further and look at the technology behind it, you're like, this is stupid. Why on earth would anybody buy this thing? And once you understand where the money's going, it's even more. I don't get it. Really, all it's doing for anyone who understands what these are, even if you were his supporter, is further eroding his qualifications, in my mind. Whatever qualifications he had.
Yep. And I think the top, that it was like, there were 45 or 48,000 of these that were minted. So, congratulations on handing Trump another $4.5 million of money that he didn't earn and doesn't deserve.
Yeah. Yeah. And someone said, and this was like a TikTok video or something that I saw. They're like, the dollar amount plus the limit per household. Like you had a limit of 100 per household or something. So if you wanted to buy 100 of them, that was your limit. Like if you wanted to buy 101, you couldn't buy another one.
A bigger idiot.
Right, per household, right? And they were claiming that the dollar amount plus, times 100, which would be like what, 9,900, right? 100 times $99 is just below the federal limit that needs to be reported for a transfer to the IRS. Right? Yep. So like if I transfer $10,000 to you,
because
that gets reported to the IRS because then it's taxable. Well, it's always taxable, right? If I sent you $1, technically that's taxable. But it doesn't have to be, I don't have to report $1 to the IRS. If I send you $10,000, that has to be reported to the IRS. $9,900 does not have to be reported to the IRS. Coincidence? Right? Is that coincidental?
There's a whole thing. And I don't know how much faith I put into it, but there's a whole thing about this having been set up entirely for money laundering as well. So
right. So the whole thing's ridiculous.
Whatever.
And I'm sorry, but if you're listening to the show and you were going to vote for this man in 2024, stop listening. Like I'm gonna right there. I'm sorry, you're not gonna hear any content on this show that you're gonna like about this man from here on.
January 6th.
Yeah.
January 6th, man.
Yeah, we've devoted too much airtime. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. All right, so
just like I can't deal with it anymore.
Our next article comes from Bleeping Computer, and Okta just became an open source company unwittingly. So Okta, if you're familiar with Okta, they are a cloud-based identity provider, if I understand correctly. I don't know if they do any like on-prem deployment stuff, but they do identity, right? They do like single sign-on, as far as I understand. They are closed source. However, their source code is on GitHub, obviously in a closed repository that people cannot view. Apparently, that repository, or maybe one of those repositories, has been breached and made public. So it was like Identity Workforce or Workforce Identity System or something like that. It was one of their products. The source code for that is now out in the open. People have it, right? Okta claims no customer data was lost because obviously if it's the source code, there shouldn't be customer data in there unless you're really, really bad at writing source code. But the source code itself is, of course, now out in the open. Okta still claims that they're secure and that there's not much to worry about.
We'll talk about it later, but there could be keys in that source code, so keep
your
eyes open.
There could be, right. So, that could be bad. But yeah, I thought this was...
Just gets better and better, man.
Interesting, and, yeah. So, maybe Okta is now no longer closed. Anyway, did either of you read any more about this, or is this all news to you? Mark, you seemed completely like, who's Okta?
I heard about it.
I wasn't aware of it.
What's interesting is that Okta was made aware of this by GitHub, not by Okta finding out on their own. GitHub contacted Okta and said, hey, there's some really weird activity in your GitHub. You might want to look at that.
Oops. Yeah. So if you use Okta, maybe you want to pay attention to this. All right. The next one is from Ars Technica. Kremlin-backed hackers targeted a large petroleum refinery in a NATO nation. Now, there's a lot of not information in that title. There's a lot of vagary there.
Looks like it was an attempted hack that just failed.
Yes, yeah. Essentially, there was an attempt, and they did not break in. So I don't know. I included it mainly because it just basically shows that Russia's cyber game is still. I don't want to say strong, active.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. It's not strong. I mean, honestly, right? Of all the hacking attempts that happen day to day, a lot of them are not successful, right? So I can't really slight them for this one not being successful, but it does say that. So I mean, the article goes on to speculate that they're trying to broaden their. What did they say? Information gathering or information network. So
Well,
bad stuff.
They're attacking. Because of the Ukraine thing. They're attacking NATO nations.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Now, chances are they've been attacking NATO nations the whole time, but
yeah,
they're attributing it to the whole Ukraine war now.
Somebody noticed now. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yep. Basically.
Yeah. Assume you're going to be attacked. Make sure you have firewalls and security measures and all
Yeah.
that other shit.
Just the fact that this was being attributed. Excuse me, is why it's news.
Is it past your bedtime or something?
It is. It is.
Stand up a Linux box or a Linux VM and have any sort of public.
Oh yeah,
IP.
it'll be attacked in a second. Seconds.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I tested this on I think it was AWS.
Yeah, those are all automated. I mean, look,
Yeah.
when you're being targeted by a nation state, it's a different level of attack.
Yeah.
And yes, make sure you have all the basics done, your firewalling and close your ports and don't run things you don't have to and minimize, etc. But when you're being targeted, and I've preached this for years, if you are being targeted and it is somebody who has skills at all, they're getting in, period. Nothing you can do will prevent it. They will get in one way or another.
Yeah.
Your job is to detect them and shut them down once they're in. It's a I can't remember the guy who wrote the book, but it's not. Security has moved on from build a moat and pull up the drawbridge to time-based security, which is, they got in. How fast can you detect them and stop them? And turns out a lot of people are not very good at this. So months, years, nobody usually gets it within hours.
Right. All right, next one around is this one. This is the one that I was referring to earlier. I was hoping Paul would be around for this one since his comment about the photos of kids. So it comes from futurism.com, from The Byte. I don't know what The Byte is. Anyway, Roomba leaks. Intimate photos by Roomba vacuums leaked online. Now, I encourage you to read the story to really get the context here. But apparently, Roomba vacuums, and these were, from what I read, it sounds like these were like beta.
This is a very clickbaity title.
Beta robots.
Yeah,
these were not like production Roombas, right?
Roombas do not have cameras in them. Period.
My room.
These specific beta versions.
Hold on. All right, so these were beta.
Yes.
Beta Roombas that were trying to learn via AI how to identify objects instead of I don't know if they still use those little lighthouse things that were supposed to help prevent you from going places they weren't supposed to.
Ways. Yes.
Well, they're trying. I don't know if this is like the first time they're trying to use these AI models, and that's why these units exist. But basically, they have a camera on them, and the camera sees things, and then the things that it sees are being used to train it what things are, so that it can do things like vacuum your room without driving down the stairs or running into the treadmill or whatever, right? The thing is that it's not just taking those images and feeding them back to a computer that's identifying them. It's feeding them to people, which then say, that's a treadmill. Those are stairs. This is whatever, right? What's that?
Mechanical Turk.
Yeah, right. So apparently some of those images, which have been reviewed by human eyes, were of like the example it uses was one of them was like a woman sitting on the toilet. Now, I don't know if so. One, I would expect that anyone who has a beta Roomba probably had to accept some terms of service that says this thing has a camera on it. Don't do compromising things in front of the Roomba, right? So why these happened, I don't know, right? Did these people not know? Did they not realize? Were they not thinking? Was it a mistake? Whatever. But the whole point is the article raises some concerns, I think, about really any device you keep in your house that has a camera on it.
I heard about this from another article that I read that was much more in depth than this.
Okay.
And actually had those pictures, so they're not as racy as they like to say they are. So first of all, the Roombas were beta units that were given to employees and friends of like very specific, like small group of people that were testing out new technology. So they were all aware that these specific Roombas had cameras on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whoever happened to be sitting on the toilet probably forgot there was a Roomba with a camera on it, or didn't care, whatever. The pictures that have leaked have leaked because the Mechanical Turk company that they're using, which is overseas,
Mm-hmm.
had a private, I think it was a private Facebook group, where they were sharing pictures of things that they Mechanical Turked, not just Roombas. It just so happened that, because it was a Roomba, it made a really good headline as opposed to the myriad of other things that they were seeing with cameras that weren't.
Right.
So they were basically sharing a bunch of them, and somebody got into the group somehow, like they do, and said, "Ooh, this is bad," and took the pictures and then, wrote an article about them.
Right.
It's not a widespread thing. It's not. Roombas do not have cameras on them. As far as I know, there's no Roombas planned to have cameras on them. Although it makes sense that they're moving in that direction. I can see that happening.
No, right. I mean, if
it's happening with everything.
If the point is to let the vacuum identify an object instead of you having to mark that object, which again, I haven't used the Roomba in a decade, right? So you used to have to use those little lighthouses where you'd mark where it's not supposed to go, right? I don't know if they're still doing that. But if they wanted to use AI to say, you don't have to do a thing, you put it in the room and turn it on, and it'll figure it out. That's better, right? I mean,
yeah, it was. I mean, the images were interesting because it was identifying like cabinets and doorways, and some of it was like, okay, fine, your AI is identifying that, but that really has no use for a
why do
robot.
you care?
Like,
yeah.
Why do you care if there's a cabinet? Doorway, sure. Cabinet, who cares? But it's basically identifying things that it can move around and whatnot. So interesting article. Yeah, things are moving that way. Yes, there's cameras in your house. Try not to run around naked, or be aware that if you are running around naked, you might get caught on camera.
Let it all hang out.
All right. I think that was the last article I included. Let me look here.
Yep, I got the last two.
Yeah.
3.
So go.
So I'm gonna be the Christmas Grinch. I've got two rather nasty ones. So the first one comes from Zero Day Initiative. It is a vulnerability in the Linux kernel. Now, on the plus side,
I saw rumblings about this, but I hadn't had a chance to look into it.
You're not running this Linux kernel.
Okay.
Yeah, this is it's 5.15, I think.
Okay.
This has gotten the golden statue for scoring a perfect 10 on the CVSS score.
Okay.
Meaning that you should, if you're running this kernel, you should stop immediately.
Score ever.
Yeah.
It is a full remote code execution in the SMB2 tree disconnect system.
Fucking SMB.
Yep, Samba. So that's really kind of the only detail there really is there's a flaw in SMB2 tree disconnect. It's a validation issue, big surprise, and it leads to code execution in the context of the kernel. So you are God on the kernel.
Not good.
So like I said, if you're an enterprise, well, first of all, if you're an enterprise and you're running this level of kernel, what are you doing? I really want to know, because I don't know of any distros that would be running this cutting edge of a kernel.
Right.
But it's worth checking for and keeping an eye on, just in case.
So the rumblings that I saw, I think it was actually from Jerry. He was talking about like why he was curious about what the actual issue here was, right? And he said he was having trouble finding information about it. He was having trouble finding like any major Linux vendors even talking about it. And that would probably explain why, because they probably aren't running that kernel. Like I didn't see any announcement from Red Hat, for example, right? And that would be why we don't have that kernel included. So why would we even talk about it?
Yeah, it's. I mean, the disclosure was July. I'm not sure when, like, how far back this goes, but I suspect it's probably not super far. So it's probably, like I said, it's a cutting edge thing. If you're running a kernel that bleeding edge, then it's probably an issue. But if you're running a kernel that bleeding edge, you've probably got other problems you got to worry about too. So that's that one. Oh, then I get to be the Grinch again. Remember that LastPass breach from when did they report this? September, maybe? August. August is when they said the breach happened. I think they reported the first time in September, and then they updated it last month, and they were like, okay, it was a little bit more than we thought it was, but it's still okay. It's okay, guys. It's okay. It might not be okay anymore.
Whoops.
Yeah. So, as I understand it, and the LastPass blog entry actually puts a lot of detail in it. They breached a dev environment and stole some code, which, okay, fine, that happens. The problem is that there were keys in that code that they were using in production.
Okay.
So they were apparently cloud storage access keys and dual storage container decryption keys.
But isn't the whole point of LastPass that they're like crazy blind encrypted?
That would be the second link, and the answer is no.
What do you mean no? That was the whole that was like the selling point. It was we can't even decrypt your data.
So they can't decrypt it because they don't have the password for the master key.
Right.
So they can't. They're the encrypted fields. So hang on. So let me step back a bit.
Okay.
The whoever did this copied a ton of backup data because of the keys that they stole.
Okay.
That backup data had company names, end user names, billing addresses, email addresses, telephone numbers, IP addresses. They also got a copy of customer vault data, the backups of the customer vault data from the encrypted storage container.
Okay.
Which is their proprietary binary format that contains both unencrypted data, such as the actual websites that are in there.
Yeah.
As well as the encrypted fields such as the usernames, passwords, secured notes, etc.
Right.
According to them, those encrypted fields remain secured and can only be decrypted with a unique encryption key derived from each user's master password.
Right.
Using their architecture.
Right.
But yes, LastPass doesn't know your master password, but the encryption and decryption of all data is performed on your local LastPass client.
Yeah.
Okay. So now thinking I haven't done this. I haven't seen anybody do this, but thinking as an attacker. Okay. So the LastPass client, which also runs in the browser, by the way, which means that it's written in JavaScript, does all of the decryption on the client side.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that if I have a copy of their vault and I use that code that is available on the client side, I can jack the ripper that shit. All I got to do is throw passwords at it. Nothing's going to stop me, and I can decrypt their vaults.
Yes. But so then it comes down to, and this is really a terrible thing to be saying at this point because this was supposed to be so secure. If you have a good secure password, you should still be difficult to crack.
Right. Or if somehow they come
if
up with a
they've
collision
already,
'cause
or if they've already found a way to harvest those passwords, which there were a number of browser-side security issues that were fixed pretty quickly, if I remember correctly, with LastPass. So it is possible that there is some database somewhere of LastPass passwords, right?
I agree,
But it's
the
probably not
majority of people are
complete.
probably fine.
Yeah.
The majority of people are probably fine,
But the dude who set
but
his
not everybody.
the dude who set his LastPass password to password
Oh my.
Right.
is in
Which,
trouble.
like, let's be honest here. Like, folks are going to use simple passwords because the whole idea is that you have a simple password you're not going to forget that is tied to your
Right.
account
Right.
as your master password. That password is never used online for anything. It's just to decrypt your stuff.
Yeah. Now, me being me,
So I'm safe using something stupid. Mine is ridiculous.
I set my password vault passwords to something long, ridiculous with substitutions and
Yes.
spaces. I mean, it's a sentence.
Yep.
It's got spaces, it's got punctuation, it's got numbers and letters. Like, I don't think
Right.
someone's going to be able to rainbow table that shit.
Right. Exactly. Now I don't know how LastPass does it. As I understand it, some of the other vendors use additional information besides your password. There's like a second factor to that
Mm-hmm.
where so for instance the vendor that I use gives you like this big long set of
Yeah.
it's almost like a UUID.
Yeah.
And if you have not put that UUID in to whatever program you're using to decrypt it, even with your password, you literally cannot decrypt it because it's a combination of the two. So there's more to it than just your password. But I mean, same idea, you know, there's some sort of single password that can decrypt that data.
Right.
But you know, if at the end of the day, if you're using LastPass, be aware that you know you're probably going to start getting a lot of more spam than you usually get.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Pretty targeted because it's
Yeah,
got some really good information in it.
Here comes the phishing campaigns. Right.
And
Fresh
my-
or salt water.
Yeah,
my
right.
advice is, if you are using LastPass, any site that is critical to you, banking, anything financial, health related, etc., that is stored in LastPass, go change your passwords. You should change your master password for LastPass, and you should go change your those passwords specifically, just because the data's out there.
Yeah.
And you know it is possible theoretically to decrypt it.
Yeah. Now,
The second link that I had put in there is back from 2017. That is kind of gives you an idea of what's encrypted, what's not encrypted. So just you know, kind of be aware of all that as well if you're using it. By all means, if you use LastPass, continue using it. Like a password manager is better than not having a password manager and using the same password for everything. But there are limitations, and there's always compromises. So there's your Christmas Grinch for the year.
all right. So, yeah. LastPass. I mean, hopefully folks are safe because of their strong passwords, but I think I agree with you. There's going to be folks that did not use strong passwords, and that's unfortunate. Personally, I haven't used LastPass in a while. I've been using Bitwarden, but I probably still have a database up there. I don't think I may have gone back and deleted it. I can't remember, to be honest. So I may have an outdated database that people have now.
This came off of a backup. Who knows how new the backup was? So you know, maybe your data's in there.
Yeah, right.
Like that.
Right. So, anyway, all right. So that's it for the news for tonight. Let me get back to my notes here. It's still bothering me that the website is down. I was poking around at things. So, all right, folks. It has been a fun episode. My God, it's probably like 3 hours at this point. We started a little after 7, and it's now almost 11.
45 minutes.
My God, this is gonna be a nightmare to edit. Hopefully the mixer is. Oh my God, the mixer's almost full. The recording on the mixer is almost full.
Now you know the limit.
Keeps plugging and unplugging some Windows device.
It's the stupid Windows laptop I have for work that just does this all day long.
Stop doing the thing. Stop plugging and unplugging. We know you're doing it just to bother us.
It's sleeping. It just does this in its sleep. It's the stupidest device.
Then unplug the
Alright,
controller. Anyway, or the
Take
speaker.
us home, Nate, because I have to get up at stupid o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and I apparently have a website to fix and a podcast edit. So, right. Thank you for anyone who watched this live. There are still people in the chat. I don't know how you stuck around for this long, but thank you very much for being here.
Because we're whimsical and charming.
Whimsical. There's your word again, man. Don't go into the rant as to why that's a word now. You can talk about it next show.
Next time.
If you want to watch us live, look us up on YouTube or Twitch. We did tinker with Owncast tonight. I don't know if that's going to stick around or not, but if you're curious about it, feel free to reach out and say, yes, you should totally keep doing this. If you want to find us on the socials, you can find us on Facebook or Twitter. You can also find me on Mastodon. I've been posting stuff about the show as me instead of having a separate account, gangriff@social.underground.org. I will put a link to those in the notes. Otherwise, I think I'm going to cut it short. Thank you, folks, for watching and listening. Be sure to support the show. You can find links on how to do that in the notes. And we will catch you on the next show, which we should be back to our normal schedule, I think, in January. So first and second and fourth Thursday of the month. With that, I think that's it. You guys have any closing thoughts before I take us out of here?
Merry Christmas, Happy
So
New
I was going to
Year,
wax philosophical
all that
on
stuff to people.
All right, we're gonna cut
night,
Jason off right there. Good night, everybody. Have a good one.